1.
I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual regular meeting for Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. The time is 6:30 p.m. or 18:30. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Mayor Valdez.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Malin.
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Here.
Councilmember Elrod. Councilmember Fay.
Here.
Councilmember Grove.
Here.
Councilmember Milliman. Mayor, we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. All right, and Sam Fox, Assistant to the City Manager, if you could please tell us how this meeting will proceed.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, staff, citizens, and guests. I'm Sam Fox, Assistant to the City Manager, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this evening's virtual council meeting. We are streaming this meeting on Cable Channel 8, Facebook, and on our website at littletongov.org. Please be aware, comments left on Facebook Live will not be moderated and will not be included in the meeting minutes. Those wishing to participate in any public comment portion of the meeting are advised to view the meeting at littletongov.org, My Littleton, Littleton 8 TV, as this broadcast has the least amount of delay. The agenda will be handled by Mayor Valdez in the same way it would be handled for a regular in-person meeting. As always, citizen participation is encouraged during public comment and public hearings. To participate via phone, please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 925-0816-7672. There will be 2 opportunities for citizen participation this evening, once during public comment and again during ordinances on second reading and public hearing. If you wish to speak during either of these opportunities, please call in early and stay on the line. Again, the number is 669-900-6833 and use webinar ID 925-0816-7672. When public comment or the public hearing is announced, press star 9 to raise your hand and be recognized as speaker. Microphones will be muted for all citizens calling in. Speakers will have 3 minutes to address council. The city clerk will announce when you have 30 seconds remaining, and again when your time is up. For agenda items, Mayor Valdez will ask for a motion and a second, followed by a discussion and a vote. Council will vote on all agenda items using a thumbs up for a yes vote and a thumbs down for a no vote. The clerk will call each vote with all ayes and nays. Again, if you plan on participating during public comment or the public hearing, please call 669-900-6833. When prompted, enter the webinar ID 925-0816-7672. Please stay on the line and press star 9 to raise your hand to speak. Thank you, Mayor.
Great, thank you very much, and let the record show that Councilmember Milliman has joined us. All right, Council, you've had a chance to look at the agenda. Do we have any changes? Seeing none, agenda is approved. Move down to our comments and reports. We'll start with our City Manager.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I just have a brief update here this evening. Actually, I'd like to share a little bit of good news, and specifically on our COVID front. And perhaps you saw on the news here this evening, looks like our state has made some pretty good positive gains here in reducing some of the COVID incidents. And specifically for Arapahoe County, we are right on the threshold of moving from red to orange. In fact, that may have actually happened today. So when we look at the incident rates, hospitalizations, all of this has just moved in a very positive direction. So very, very encouraging. Of course, what this means is that once we reach that, drop below that threshold, then those businesses that actually applied and got approved for the 5-star certification have to wait 7 days. And so it could be, roughly a week from today, where the businesses in Arapahoe County then would be able to take advantage of that 5-star certification and actually open to a higher capacity within their building. In essence, operate at level yellow. So again, just wanted to share that update. Very encouraging. Let's hope we keep that trend going.
Great. Thank you very much. City Attorney.
No report. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our council members. We'll start with Councilmember Driscoll.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Fay.
About a week ago, on January 21st, we had our first virtual citizen meeting, and 60 people signed up, and most of those attended. We got it all done in 50 minutes. So we'll plan to have another one in June.
Great.
That's
All right. Good. That was a very successful meeting I think you had.
Yes.
Good.
Pleased with it.
Councilmember Grove.
No report other than I attended the DU's presentation on homelessness, which is kind of Earl's thing. So I'm sure she'll be keeping us informed about that. It was very, very good.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Milliman.
Good evening or morning, evening. Sorry, I was late. I apologize for that. I agree with Pam. I too attended or participated in the Tri-City Homelessness Initiative study last Thursday. It was fascinating and also terribly horrifying at the same time, with a lot of really good data and information that was shared with all the 3 cities. So very much appreciative of everyone that provided that data to us. I do have a couple of updates. The first one is from the South Metro Housing Options Board meeting. They are beginning to house the youth from the foster youth program. This is a program where funds are going to be used to provide vouchers to youths coming out of the foster care system to help them utilize available services within the community and to have housing for 36 months, and to try to help these folks find success and prevent them from becoming unhoused or homeless. Unfortunately, because of my work schedule, I was not able to attend the Housing Task Force Committee meeting, which was last Thursday, but I will share a couple of items that they asked me to share with everybody this evening. A lot of discussion about the corridors, the ULUC corridors discussion. They are asking for an update and projected completion of the map showing where residential buildings could be placed within the corridors. They're also asking for comparison of current zoning versus proposed zoning data and details to demonstrate the impact of new zoning along the corridors. They have said that many people have been reaching out to the Housing Authority and voicing their concerns about the lack of density in the corridors, since the corridors is the best place to add more residential housing. I think that's about it from the Housing Task Force, and that's it for my report. So thanks.
Great. Mayor Pro Tem Millen.
No report tonight. Thanks, Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much. Sama Fox, I think you did put up a link for the Tri-City meeting regarding homelessness, did you not?
I did, yes, and I've included it on our website under homeless initiatives. You can find the link to the meeting and the studies as well.
Great. And how would a citizen get to that?
Via our website, I would go ahead and use the search tool to type in homeless initiatives on the littletongov.org website.
Great. Thank you very much. And Council, the Metro mayors, one of the things that we have been discussing lately is working with our state legislators and CML regarding the funding allocations of the transportation funds. As you know, the whole state is hurting, is short funds, and we need more. But a part of the concern that the Metro mayors have been working on is that the metro area does contribute about not quite 70% of the funds that go toward our highway funding, and but receive back about 35%. And it's a very complicated formula that we're working with here, and the formula is not going to get any easier if they change it as well. But the metro area does have a higher large truck traffic versus the other regions. So the metro mayors are looking at that, working with some state legislators and CML, like I said, one of the things the state legislators are also discussing. No one's made any decision, but it's just discussion only, is that will they use fees or have a tax increase of some sort? But again, that it's only for discussion. They haven't made any decisions at this point. Let's see, our next meeting, council, is right after this meeting. Matter of fact, we do have a study session immediately after this meeting, but then our next meeting will be next Tuesday after that study session, and that will be February 9th at 6:30. And with that, we will move on to our next item with a citizen's appearance, of which we have no citizen's appearance scheduled tonight. But to the city manager, maybe at some point, if not now, maybe later, you can just let folks know what the citizen's appearance is all about versus the public comment, so that maybe there's some groups out there that would like to get on our schedule.
I'd be happy to. Let me see what I can do to kind of promote that.
Great.
And we'll share some more detail.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's see. So we'll move down to our public comments. So the time now is, I'll open it up at 6:41. Sam Fox, if you could please inform our audience how they can participate.
Thank you. If you wish to address City Council, please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 925-0816-7672. Press star 9 to raise your hand and be recognized as a speaker. Citizen microphones will be automatically muted until the citizen is called upon by the last 3 digits of their phone number. When called on to speak, please state your name and district or address clearly for the record. Public comment is an opportunity to express opinions or ask questions regarding issues that are not part of public hearings on tonight's agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. The city clerk will notify you when you have 30 seconds remaining, and again when your time is up. The City Council is not authorized under the Colorado Open Meetings Law to discuss, comment, or take action at this meeting on any issue raised by public comment that is not part of tonight's agenda. The mayor may refer the matter to the city manager or the city attorney for immediate comment after the public comment, or to staff to obtain additional information and report back to the council as appropriate. We expect comments to be civil. Disrespectful or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. Mayor, we currently have callers on the line. I'd just like to remind our callers to press star 9 if you'd like to raise your hand and be recognized.
Great.
Our first caller is caller 819. Caller 819, you have been unmuted and may begin speaking.
Hi, Council. This is, Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from the City Center in downtown. First off, I wanted to thank you for your participation in the Tri-City Committee on Homelessness, and that was an interesting presentation that's been referred to, but I want to point out that Dr. Dana Brisson answered a question and said he cautions cities against building the cheap version of affordable housing. Mistakes were made after World War II, and don't repeat the mistake. Be innovative instead. Find new partners, such as hospitals, and he mentioned something called Vacancy Taxes, and he said there's other short videos on the website with other alternatives, but require 20 to 30% of what is built as affordable to middle and below middle income folks. And I'm going to point out, Council, you haven't done that, and you need to do that. And you are the only people who can do it. Staff hasn't done it. You've got to demand that staff add that to our products. Thanks for this consideration. And also add that we need a requirement for universal design, which is for disabled and older people, but works for people with young children and everybody. By definition, this is the population that needs housing. They can't get into the market-based housing that's being built in Littleton. So this is the housing that you, Council, must set the goals and rules to provide. My second comment is about the study session, and you're asked to reaffirm the Unified Land Use Code as the top priority. First, you shouldn't do that in the study session. This is an issue of top priority to the people, and you shouldn't do it in a study session. But I speak tonight to point out that you really shouldn't confirm that the ULC is the top priority in Goal 1. Instead, it's your duty and responsibility to ask the city manager and staff to insert an essential step in the process that never was performed, and to have staff add a product that never was delivered before the ULUC is done. You're the only people who can do this. We, the people, cannot. So proceeding with a fantasy-based, market-driven rezoning is the fastest and best way to cripple and destroy the future of Littleton.
30 seconds.
You're going to completely remove alternatives for the next 30 to 40 city councils, and you do not have the right to do that. Stop the ULUC or pause it to insert a comprehensive plan, which was never delivered. We have no shared vision. We have no comprehensive plan, which must be specific with population targets at certain points in time, showing targets with housing types and numbers, business types and numbers, open space and shared spaces.
That's
broken
time.
down by locations and areas. And I have much more to say.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank you very much. Sema, next caller, please.
Thank you. Our next caller is caller 443. Caller 443, you have been unmuted. Press *6 to unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Yeah, hello there. My name is Robin Bernstein. I'm over at Geneva Village, and I agree with Pam Chadbourne. You know, we need affordable housing here at Geneva Village, which we have already. But, you know, with all this developing, you know, we need to have something affordable. And a lot of these older people here, they can't get around without, you know, with stairs and, you know, walking upstairs. That's why a lot of them are here, because it is accessible. So I agree with Pam. She's very, you know, concise. And thanks. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much, Robin. Sema, next caller.
Thank you, Mayor. That is our last caller in the queue.
Okay, I will close the public comments. It is 6:47. City Attorney or City Manager, any comments you'd like to add?
No comments, Mayor.
Yeah, I would just add in that, you know, going forward, some of the topics that council will weigh into is that idea about affordability. Is there a way to provide incentives for developers going forward? That's going to come forward through the ULUC process. And one of the other things that was touched upon is housing for older persons or those perhaps with mobility issues, the last two callers. I've seen other land use codes that have talked about kind of accessibility requirements as it relates, and that's certainly going to be all part of the discussion going forward. So we hear you, and it'll be coming forward.
Great. Thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to our consent agenda items. Sema Fox, if you would, please.
Yes, consent agenda items may be adopted by a simple motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to a vote on the motion. Any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, we have two items under 6A, Resolution 020-2021, approving Ethan Feldman as municipal court judge for a 2-year term and provide a compensation adjustment based on his 2021 performance evaluation. Item 6B, ID number 21-012, approval of the January 19, 2021 virtual regular meeting minutes. Council, do we have a motion?
Yes, I move to approve consent items A and B.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Driscoll and second by the Mayor Pro Tem. Council, let's go ahead and vote. A thumbs up will be to approve, a thumb down to deny. Ready? Vote.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great. Under item number 7, general business, we have no general business tonight, so we'll go ahead and we'll move down to our ordinances on second reading. Let's see, Sam Fox, if you could please inform the audience on how they can participate.
Thank you. Citizens wishing to speak during either of the public hearings tonight should please call 669-900-6833. And when prompted, enter the webinar ID 925-0816-7672. Press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized. After the staff presentation, you will be called upon to speak by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Speakers will have 3 minutes to address the council on the public hearing topic. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Senator Fox. All right, our first item tonight is agenda item 8A. It's ordinance number 02-2021, an ordinance on second reading, adding chapter 24 entitled Firearms Retailer to title 3 regular business. Business regulations, sorry. So council, what we are going to do is consider an ordinance on firearms and retailers. We will be making a decision tonight on this ordinance. And with that, I will turn it over to the city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As mentioned, tonight is a licensing provision, licensing ordinance that would apply certain regulations to those that are selling firearms within our community. See if I can get my PowerPoint going. I do have with me tonight Chief Stevens, who also has weighed in on these proposed regulations. I don't know if I'm showing the right one. I think so. So, it's no secret to this council that there have been a number of break-ins to firearm retailers, not only within the city of Littleton recently, but within the Denver metro area and across the country. In the city of Littleton, we've experienced approximately 10 burglaries at 5 different firearms locations, including pawn shops. And that has resulted in approximately 144 firearms entering the criminal market. As council is aware, a lot of these firearms are used in the commission of other crimes, which has a tremendous impact not only within the city of Littleton, but the community as a whole. In taking a look at this, and I'll let Chief Stevens weigh in, but in taking a look at most of these burglaries that happen within these firearm stores or firearm retailers, this is in part to the simple fact that they're not locked up. Sure, they're within a secured building, but once you make access, once you breach that building, the ability for these groups of individuals to come in, to clean out, for the most part, any of these firearm retailers and take those firearms onto the streets is a matter of minutes. Chief, I don't know if you want to weigh in at this point regarding kind of your experience surrounding these types of burglaries, whether it's from your investigation or whether it's from your experience in law enforcement dealing with other agencies, dealing with the ATF and the FBI as it relates to this.
Well, thanks, Reed. You've hit it pretty well in your summarization of what we've experienced in Littleton, and certainly Littleton is not unique. I mean, these types of burglaries are occurring all over the metro area and, of course, across the nation. The common factor seems to be that the people who are committing these burglaries, they're pretty resourceful, right? So the retailers it's been a battle of wits between the retailers and the burglars, and the retailers spend a lot of money on exterior security for their buildings and alarm systems and bollards and bars and gates and everything you can possibly think of to prevent folks from getting in, and the burglars still get in. And one of their favorite methods in the last couple of years has been to steal a car or more likely a larger vehicle like a SUV or pickup and just drive it through the front of the business, through the glass, through the gates. And in other businesses, they've driven it through brick walls, to gain access. And then once they're inside, teams of burglars, we've had this happen throughout the metro area over the last several years. Teams of burglars, 3 or 4 or 5, will rush in. They know what they're looking for. Usually in the losses in Littleton, and almost every firearms loss in Littleton at a firearms retailer has been on weapons that were left in display cases. So glass display cases are shattered, and then the burglars, you've seen it on videos throughout, on the media, they quickly grab 10 guns per case or 15 guns per case, throw them in a duffel bag, and then all 4 or 5 people do that. Next thing you know, there's 50 or 60 guns walking out the door, or running out the door, I guess, in less than 3 minutes on average. So, it's been a sense of frustration for the retailers. Of course, they're losing tens of thousands of dollars worth of inventory and property damage. But of course, also for law enforcement and for the community, when in my opinion, as a law enforcement professional with 30 years experience, it would be helpful if we could prevent these further by simply locking these firearms up in a more secure manner inside the business and a gun safe or a safe room, as this ordinance proposes.
Thank you, Chief. And so, as Chief mentions, that's kind of the one baseline. How are we going to get these, protect these weapons from entering, the criminal market? And that is locking them up. And so, one of the things that we kind of brainstormed and tried to get our head around, and I will note this, that Chief Stevens actually did meet with each of the firearm retailers within the city to talk to them, to take kind of a look at what was going on and give them his opinions in regard to what makes the most sense in terms of making sure that these firearms aren't entering the market illegally. And so, and I guess I'll give you a little bit more backstory in regard to coming up with this ordinance. Sometimes a lot of times what attorneys will do is they'll take a look and see what other people have done, what other jurisdictions have done. I will let you know that across the country, much less across the state of Colorado, there aren't very many cities that have any regulations regarding the storage of firearms. Certainly, the federal government has license requirements for federal firearms dealers or brokers. That requires a few things: background checks, criminal checks, certain reporting requirements, keeping an inventory of those weapons, who they're sold to, things like that. Same goes for the state, pretty much. Background checks requiring those things. Other than that, there's not a lot of states, much less cities across our country, that have taken steps, necessary steps, in my opinion, to protect public health, public safety, and the welfare of our communities by ensuring that once a store is breached, that these firearms aren't just, as Chief Stevens spoke to, just being thrown in a duffel bag and out the door. So what this ordinance does, or what the proposed ordinance does, is a few things. So requires an annual license. This is kind of one of the things that the city has decided to start looking at as it relates to, STRs was the most recent one, where we talked about an annual license. An alarm notification to the Littleton Police Department. With a lot of, commercial businesses, there's a lot of false alarms. And so most of the alarm companies, they'll send notification to whoever it is, the manager. Normally there's a contact for any business. And I'm not talking about firearms in particular, but any business. Who do we call? Who's the first person we notify? And then eventually it gets to the Littleton Police Department if, someone's not supposed to be there at that time. And they say, no one's supposed to be in the store. And then we get the call. In this particular firearms license ordinance, what we would like is LPD to know, first thing, the response time by the Littleton Police Department is excellent, but just a couple minutes delay until we get a notification. That's 100 weapons leaving the store. And the other thing is what we've developed. It's called a safe storage plan. And so this will be an approval by LPD. And it'll be approved annually. And what it does is addresses a number of things. One of the things that we're talking about is, what is your plan for the storage of firearms during retail hours? What's your plan during non-retail hours? How are they being secured? How are they being stored? All this done to ensure that they're not, or they have a good chance of not making it out into the streets. So what the requirements of the ordinance are that during non-business hours, all firearms that are located in the retailer's place of business are going to be stored in a locked safe. And we have specifications of what that safe is. It's not a cardboard box that says safe on it. Locked in a steel gun cabinet or secured in the safe room. We have developed kind of a rudimentary, if you will, definition for what is considered a safe room. It's not just a room it has to be secured. It has to be fortified in terms of the walls. It has to have a steel door. You can't have access from the outside from windows or other doorways. It is one room where you can store your firearms. We're very sensitive to how this may impact certain gun retailers in the city. We understand that there are some that have quite a few. We are very cognizant of the fact that they don't want to scratch them up. They don't want to use, kind of the cabling system that goes through, although those can be surpassed simply by cutting the cable. But we're thoughtful of the fact that this is going to impose an expense on some of those retailers in the sense that it's going to be extra time. It's going to be extra time in which someone's going to need to close down. It's going to be extra time in which someone's going to need to reopen, and they're going to have to be careful so that they aren't damaging the weapons. That's if they're choosing to put them in gun cabinets or in safes. We do have the option to have this safe room, which I alluded to, a room that's secure, that would be easy, if you will, to secure the firearms so that they're not accessible to the public. Some of the other requirements, as we go through, and when I say as we go through, this is the Littleton Police Department that's going to go through and do these inspections to find out about this this plan that they have, the safe storage plan. So what are the alarm systems that are in place? What are the theft deterrent systems that are in place? How do you, just as a business practice, this, when you're showing an individual a gun, how are you making sure that you see everything else going on in your store? What are your procedures for letting someone handle one of these, guns? Do you turn your back and then, what's happening behind you? So loss, theft reporting, keeping track of all that, the description of all your anti-theft measures and policies and practices that are in place, disaster plan. So disaster plan, we really think of, well, a lot of times we think of a criminal element. What if there is not the criminal element? What if something happens? There's a flood, fire, something like that. What, sort of information do you have in terms of your disaster plan? Where are your items secured? Where are the financials secured? Your records secured, so that those remain intact, so that you can provide this inventory list to the federal government if they're looking for it, or for the state government to make sure that you have an adequate inventory of what you had at that time. So the structural security, Chief Stevens talked about, kind of some of the minimal requirements that you've seen. You see a lot of gun retailers that will put bars up on their windows, the break-proof glass or that coating so that it doesn't, shatter as easily. The bollards that Chief Stevens mentioned, putting those out in front of your building. It's a variety of different things as it relates to structural security that will come into play. Inventory security, how are you keeping track of these records? Employee screening. Not a lot of regulations out there as it relates to what employees you're actually hiring. And then employee training and education about, their policies and procedures as it relates to loss prevention, making sure that, they're adequately training their employees to safeguard against the loss of firearms. So we've taken all these ideas, if you will, all these requirements, and put them into what we call a safe storage plan, something that LPD can walk through with a gun retailer, figure out, and advise them. I think, Chief Stevens, if you want to be able to speak to the type of training that a lot of your officers have as it relates to theft deterrence, this isn't just specifically for gun retailers. It's for all businesses, where simply consulting with law enforcement can provide a lot of valuable tips, things that perhaps they're not thinking about to ensure that they're not the victims of burglaries in the future.
Yeah, so, in addition to formal training on things like crime prevention through environmental design, that's a general crime deterrent training on using lighting and landscaping, things like that for exterior business, for burglary in general. Our officers have a lot of experience just in seeing things, during their calls for service on different burglars, how burglars are entering buildings, what are the trends happening throughout the metro area and the country on particular types of burglary. In this case, obviously, retail gun stores. what's happening now and what is their modus operandi. So how are they doing that? And then what our experiences have been, and what have our experiences been with other retailers that have been successful in deterring these burglaries? And there's really, we're talking about 5 licensed firearms retailers in a traditional sense in Littleton. There's 3 pawn shops that sell firearms. There's a historical firearms dealer. There's quite a few firearms. And then there's what I'd call a traditional retail firearms location where firearm sales is their primary responsibility. And some of those locations have, some of the pawn shops especially, have utilized steel cages where they lock up their firearms at night. They're out of their display cases. They're moved into a reinforced steel cage. And they've been burglarized since they have done that, and they have not lost any firearms. So to me, it shows that we have a proven track record on things that other retailers have done that our officers have seen, and we're happy to share that information with all retailers on some things that they can do. And like Reed said, we're very cognizant as well, being the ones that are going to be tasked with trying to educate folks and partner with them. Really, is how I look at it as the chief of police. I want to partner with the retailers to do the least burdensome thing that we can do that will be the safest for the community. So there's a variety of things that we can help them with on trying to identify weaknesses in their defense of their property. But there's also a way that we can, assist them in education on a number of types of things. And our officers are very knowledgeable on those types of things.
Great. Anything else, Reed?
No, I would just volunteer Chief Stevens that he's more than happy to go to any retailer, be gun licensed retailer or someone else, and him and his team can provide tips on protecting their product.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And Council, before we move into our questions, we're going to Sam Fox. If you could please remind our callers how they can participate again.
Yes, citizens wishing to speak during the public hearing tonight should please call 669-900-6833. When prompted, enter the webinar ID 925-0816-7672. Press star 9 to raise your hand and be recognized. Speakers will be recognized by the last 3 digits of their phone number and will have 3 minutes to address council on the public hearing topic.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, before we do our public hearing, do we have any questions we want to go into at this point? If so, raise your hand. We have Councilmember Driscoll, then Fay.
Yes, Reed, I'm reading the ordinance, and under 3-24-10, it talks about violations and penalties. Is this harsh enough? I mean, if somebody continues to get broken into, maybe they played by the rules and somehow they still got burglarized. Do we have a 2-strike rule or something like that? You're out, and other than suspension of license and or a fine, potentially imprisonment too, it says here. I'm just wondering if we've gone far enough. I'm talking one particular retailer that has had issues with the city.
Yeah, I would say that, there's a variety of penalties, if you will, for violating the ordinance. So as you mentioned, one, there is a fine. You can be fined $26.50. That's statutory limits for a municipality. $2,650 each day that you're in violation. Additionally, we have the revocation or suspension process. So we could have a hearing. We could revoke your license. So you are no longer allowed to operate within the city of Littleton. As it relates to jail, yes, it's punishable by jail up to 364 days. So I think it's as stiff as we can go for a municipality in terms of what our limitations are, but I think we can get there in providing at least proper deterrence as it relates to penalties.
Thank you. Councilmember Fay.
2 things. One is, are we thinking of ammunition as well as firearms? And the second thing is, and this is for the chief in particular, do we have any idea why a particular retailer repeatedly lets himself be burglarized?
Well, the first question on ammunition, I was asked about that by Reed when he was doing his research, and it's my opinion that adding ammunition to this would put an undue burden on the retailers and basically on us for our enforcement and education on that as well. Plus, we have not seen any burglaries that I'm aware of in the entire metro area where ammunition was taken. Usually, they're not saying that would not happen, especially given the difficulty in finding ammunition now across the country and those types of things. But I think for the risk that these burglars are taking, they're going after the firearms. And we don't anticipate as a profession at this point that ammunition will be a problem. And that stuff's pretty bulky and heavy, a lot more difficult to try to move around a retail establishment. So that's why we didn't touch that. And then on the other question, the answer to the other question is, there has been a couple different retailers, only 2 are still in business that have been hit multiple times. And one has taken some steps to secure the firearms inside the business during after hours, the one I was talking about, where the steel cage was utilized. They had been burglarized again and again. They did not lose any weapons during that other burglary where the weapons were secured. The other business has done, I think, a very admirable job of responding to burglaries. So they're reactive in the fact that they've put a lot more money into their traditional security systems and some non-traditional security systems in their facilities. Although we have seen they're the most recent victim of burglary in the city in July, where 52 weapons were taken because the burglars defeated all of those exterior and interior security methods. And then once they were inside, and this burglary occurred in less than 3 minutes from entry to exit, 52 weapons were taken from non-secure display cases, including 2 fully automatic machine guns. So, and it was that fast, and they defeated some very admirable and very impressive exterior security. So that's really my frustration as a law enforcement officer, is that if those weapons were in gun safes like most people have in their houses, just a regular gun safe, I'm very confident that burglary would not have occurred. At least they would not have been able to get those weapons. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Chief Stevens was saying, when we looked at the ammunition, it is very heavy and very bulky. And so when someone would be targeting a particular business, that would probably not be what they'd be wasting their energy on, physically and literally.
All right, thank you. And with that, council, we're going to open up the public hearing. It is 7:12. Sam Fox, do you have any callers?
Yes, Mayor, we do have callers on the line. I'd just like to remind them to press *9 if you'd like to raise your hand and be recognized to speak on this topic. Again, if you're listening in our queue, please go ahead and press *9 to be recognized to speak on this topic. Mayor, our first caller will be caller 819. Caller 819, you have been unmuted and may begin speaking.
Hi, Council. This is, sorry about this, Pam Chadbourne again. Many citizens wrote to you about this matter, and all of them endorsed passing this ordinance. So first, I'm going to ask you to pay attention to that input and follow their advice. Second, I'd really like to thank staff for the work that they've done on assembling this ordinance. It sounds good and appropriately researched, and boy, that's great. I think we're well served as a city, and you are well served as a council by their work. So I'd like to mention a couple of things. The CPTED lighting in particular, I'm going to put Jerry may be the only person who's heard this from me, but lighting is my original and primary issue. And we do not have a good lighting ordinance now. We need a good lighting ordinance. Good lighting is defined by illuminating what needs to be lit and not spreading glare everywhere else. And that's what's happening in Littleton now. And before you make any more code changes, you need to repass the model lighting ordinance, which we had in effect for 10 years, and which the mayor at the time reached down past 2 layers of city government in violation of our code to direct staff to repeal. That was wrong. The repeal was wrong. We need to restore the model lighting ordinance-based lighting ordinance and get that back in effect. This sounds reasonable to me. It is not an undue burden on the retailers. And I'm going to point out my concern with the market. I don't understand why insurance doesn't take care of this problem. Something's clearly wrong with firearm retailer insurance, because, you know, the rates for a store that's hit many times should go way up and cause them to make these investments. That's not happening. And so, council, I plead with you that in this case, let our city be a leader. You've actually said that this is one of your goals. You want to lead other cities. So lead other cities and pass this ordinance. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Sarah Fox, next caller, please.
Thank you. I'd like to make a final reminder that if you're in the queue and would like to speak, please press *9. Our next caller will be caller 838. Caller 838, you have been unmuted. Please press *6 to unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, how are you? Tonight, my name is Giovanni Galliano. I am the owner of Old Steel Historical Firearms. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to listen to the whole meeting, but I'm very happy that you guys are talking and discussing about security and safety. I have a question in regards of the type of product and firearms that we sell in my location. We are an historical firearms type of shop. We currently have about close to 1,000 firearms in our shop, but we don't have the conventional type of inventory. A large majority of the firearms that we have, or they're antiques, or they're muskets, or they're from the 1800s, and a big majority of those, they don't even work because we cater to collectors. We don't carry Glocks or ARs or any type of thing that is related to that. The main product that we have is basically collectible items. I am trying to conceive the fact that, the base security for this will be, to put, 1,000 firearms in a safe, but I don't see that happening. and that is an actual fact, Also, I understand that the type of product that we sell, I believe that we can do something to secure the type of guns that we have, better. I had a visit from the police department not too long ago, and we discussed with them that. And some of those things were implemented already. We do have 2 types of security systems. We also have a concrete building that is extremely hard to get in. And we have 3 military vehicles parked in front of the building as well, so nobody can have access to the door. What are the possible suggestions for what we have? Because, like I said, from the type of firearms that we have and carry, putting 1,000 guns in a safe is not going to be possible.
30 seconds.
Reed, I think I can respond to this one. I'm sorry, I missed your last name.
Chief,
my name is Giovanni Galliano.
Chief, if we could get through all the callers first, and then maybe you could respond.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. Julian, go ahead.
Yes, Giovanni Galliano is my name.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything else, Giuliani?
No.
Okay.
That's it.
Great. Thank you very much. Sama, do we have any more callers?
Mayor, that was our last hand in the queue.
Great. Thank you very much. With that, it is 7:19, and I will close the public hearing. And Chief, if you could hold off just for a second, Council, if we probably have questions before we want to make a motion, but I'd like to hear from the chief, if you will, please.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. Mr. Aliano, I just want to let you know that you illustrate a good point. You know, this is a new ordinance. It's a new area, kind of like Reed was talking about. There aren't too many places around the country that are doing something like this. So I think we have some room for some flexibility, given unique situations for retailers, you know, and as the folks tasked with the enforcement of this, and it's an educational piece on both sides. Like I said, we want to be in partnership with the retailers so that we can serve all of our goals. You know, we want you all to have successful businesses. At the same time, we want to do everything we can to keep the community as safe as possible. Your business obviously has some very, very unique circumstances, and we would be glad to meet with you, just like any other firearms retailer in the city, and talk about your individual business and your individual needs as we move forward in this thing. So we will be in contact with you very soon, and I think we'll work in partnership and get you where we need to be in compliance with this ordinance as far as safety for the community.
Great. Thank you, Chief. All right. And with that, Council, I'll open it up to questions or motion. Councilmember Milliman? You are muted.
Sorry. Mayor, I'd like to move to approve Ordinance 02-2021 on second reading, adding Chapter 24 entitled Firearms Retailers to Title 3 Business Regulations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Councilmember Fay, and let's open it up for discussion. I'll go first, and then we'll let the rest of you go ahead and raise your hands when you're ready. First of all, to our city attorney and Chief of Police, thank you very much for what you've come up with. I think it's something that is, it's definitely for the safety of our citizens. And thank you very much for coming up with something that is a very reasonable plan to do. I believe I visited all the establishments here in the city of Littleton, as well as other establishments. And the pawn shops are very different than our two retailers. And our two retailers are very different than one another, as we just heard from one of them. With that in mind, I have a few things, and it's really for the city attorney. It's just some clarifications or maybe something you can add to it. And that would be on ordinance on the third page, line number 9, where it talks about no person. Let's see, line 9, where no person or business may sell firearms within the city of Littleton unless they have a license. Now, when we're talking about no person, an individual, if they want to sell or transfer ownership of a gun, they have to go through a licensed dealer at this point. So how do you mean that sentence to be? City attorney, you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was pulling up the session that you're referencing.
I'm sorry. Yeah, page 3, line 9. Line 9.
Certainly the intent is not to preclude, an individual who perhaps comes into a firearm and gets inherited to them to sell it to a licensed dealer. It's really more for someone who's actually in the business of selling firearms rather than that person who sells one to a federal licensed firearm broker.
But my thought there, if I wanted to sell, let's say, a gun to a friend, I don't have a license.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Right, that would be illegal for me to do anyway. So that's why I would have to say go to an establishment with a license. So do we want to leave in no person since it is a state law already?
I think it works, Mayor.
Okay, all right.
You can certainly have someone who has a license, a federal firearms license, an individual who's gone through and been federally licensed, who has not incorporated into a business, selling that because he has a federal firearms license. So the requirement is that he needs to get a Littleton firearms license.
Okay. Yeah, if you're comfortable with that, as I was reading it, though, that was one of the things I thought when it just says no person. But again, I have to go through a licensed dealer anyway. Also, in the ordinance, page 4, line 9. The contact information. We don't say anything about that, about when they must give us the updated information as it changes. That's something that is somewhere else.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Can you
Page 4, line 9, contact information.
And so this relates to shall provide at least 2 authorized persons who can respond within 30 minutes.
Yeah, and if they change their cell phone, for instance, yeah, we have a cell phone number, but it may not be a good one anymore.
Correct. I can, if you wanted to amend that section, I can certainly clarify the language within there that if there's a change that they must let us know within, 48 hours. If there's a change.
Do you think that's necessary, first of all?
That's a good point that you raised, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at trying to tighten this up as tight as we can, then yeah, certainly amending section D to add a requirement that any changes to those authorized individuals shall be communicated to the Littleton Police Department within 48 hours.
Okay, thank you. And I'll look at that here in a moment. And then also in the ordinance, page 4, line 41, talks about a hearing. Who is the hearing with?
That is a good question. Right now, it's with our finance director. Everything within our licensing ordinance goes through the financing director. So it's either the financing director or their designee. I will tell you, and the question came up recently by kind of our coalition, I think it was an email question, is, the revocation or suspension process as it relates to licenses. It's not really fully fleshed out, or there's not really a good section within our entire code. So, as this particular effective date on the firearms retailer license is not for 6 months, I can assure you that we're working on it right now to come up with a administrative hearing process that we can have all of our licensing questions and those outside of mere business licensing go through. So that'll be more fleshed out, and you'll probably see that within the next month or two.
Okay, great. And I have a couple more questions here. Under safe storage, on page 1, where we talk about, let's see, page 1, reinforced walls. I'm thinking that all walls are reinforced. We haven't really defined what a reinforced wall is. And a wall is difficult to get through. And I think in there we do say that it needs to be
designed to deter. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Designed to deter or hinder. Simply, having some drywall up, that's not the intent, that you've drywalled a room and that someone would just take a, kick through the wall. It's going to have to be something more than that, Mayor. And that'll come forward during the safe storage kind of tour that LPD will go on.
Okay. Yeah, I was just a little concerned that we're not defining reinforced that well. Let's see. Also on page 1, where it talks about not removing the trigger guards, I'm a little concerned there that for a potential buyer, how would they dry fire to test it if the trigger guard is on there? Because that is something that you would do when you test the weapon. It's not loaded, of course.
Right. I'll defer to Chief Stevens if he has any comment on that.
Chief, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not quite as concerned about the business practices during the day as I am about the large quantity of weapons that would be able to be taken quickly. So I think some of the business practices during normal business hours, I think that all of our retailers have pretty much demonstrated some very responsible practices. So I'm not too worried about that at this point. So I think that's something that we could look at modifying if necessary.
And it's not part of the ordinance. That's something that I guess you or your folks would be looking at when you go to somewhere.
Right. It'd be more of a suggestion or an educational piece if we had some retailers, especially like the pawn shops, who are less likely to have some personnel involved with firearms manipulation or handling. We'd be happy to work with them on some of the best practices that are out there.
Okay. And my last item was on page 2 for our city attorney. It says to notify appropriate law enforcement. And I'm thinking that could be a little confusing for some of our folks out there, because when you get your concealed weapons permit, you go through the sheriff. So I'm thinking we want to make sure that Littleton is notified. So I'm thinking that maybe we should add Littleton Police Department. What are your thoughts on that? And that's on page 2E.
Sorry, page 2. Which line number?
E as in Ed.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I'm just not following.
It's
on
okay.
page 2.
Yeah, it would be. Oh, where am I? My note says page 2.
Mayor, are you in the ordinance now, or are you looking at the storage
No,
plan?
we're still, yeah, we're past that. We're still in the safe storage. Yeah, so read, it's down just past halfway. It goes D. You'll see D. And then E says, if a loss, theft, it continues. If somebody loses if someone has their weapon stolen, that they have to notify the appropriate law enforcement authority within 24 hours after the loss, as well as ATF.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if the state requirements require you to report that as well as your federal firearms license requires the report to the ATF of lost firearms.
But I'm thinking, though, we want Littleton, our police department, to be aware that there was a loss of a weapon. Isn't that our intent here?
That would be one of the intents, yeah, as
Okay.
well as complying with their license requirements by state and federal law.
So again, that's not part of the ordinance, so we don't have to do an amendment on that thing, on that area.
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, cool. That's all I have. Council, who else has a question there? I see no other questions. Oh, Councilmember Grove.
I'm not real clear, other than we have a specific consult with Chief Stevens, how this one retailer cannot comply with this ordinance because they have too many guns. So how do we deal with that?
So the one that was that called from Old Steel. Yeah. So they have, like he was saying, numerous weapons that are very historical in nature. So we'd have to do a site survey on them, a more in-depth site survey. As he said, our officers went there and talked to them about their security methods and practices, and we surveyed them. But there's, without looking at them in more depth, it's hard to answer your question, other than to say that I'm fairly confident that, obviously non-functioning firearms, things of that nature pose less of a threat, obviously, to the community at large. And then there's just not, depending upon what their inventory is, but there's just not a lot of market out there for muskets and things like that. So a very low likelihood of them being burglarized and losing a lot of those weapons. So it's, they're really unique in their historical nature, and there may be something coming to you in the future. I don't know what the Reed would have to do with the ordinance to address those types of establishments if there may be more than one. But for us, I think that I'm confident that we can work with them and get them into some sort of mode on any weapons we feel like are, without, it's very subjective. Obviously, this can be so a little challenging, but we'll work with them. We may be coming back to Reed or council again and I'll give you an update, but on where we are with them. But I think we're confident that we can get them where they need to be to help out the community safety and their business.
Thank you.
Great. Mayor Pro Tem.
I just was thinking along the same lines as Councilmember Grove. I guess my understanding as a council member is that we're passing an ordinance, and I expect retailers to comply with the ordinance as a starting point. And if there are going to be some kind of administrative exceptions made, that there be no, that it be muskets, for example, right? I was just looking on, what is it, Old Steel, the website. There's plenty of inventory there. There's plenty lethal. And and the owner, mentioned all kinds of security measures. Armored vehicles parked out front is sort of a barrier to these kind of smash and grab jobs. Obviously, they are thinking that there's a need for security. So, yeah, as long as the balancing that gets done administratively protects the intent of this ordinance to have firearms locked up at night, then yeah, I'm okay. I just, as Chief Stevens mentioned, it's pretty subjective. I don't know, a musket's one thing, but again, there's plenty of inventory there that, while historic, is fully functioning and still a firearm. So I don't know if Chief Stevens can speak to that anymore. I do have that concern.
No, I totally hear you, and that they do pose some unique challenges. And like you, I looked at their inventory on the website, and there are plenty of weapons there that, a 1911 Colt from World War II is still a 1911 Colt from 2021. I mean, those types of firearms are still very popular, and so we'll have to look at what methods they're using, what security options they have, and make sure they comply. One of my main concerns in being the enforcement or kind of thrust into these positions to interpret this and give these suggestions is I want to make sure we have uniformity across all retailers. We want to treat everybody equally, and not become, this business has to do this and this business has to do that. Like you were saying, this is the ordinance. We need to comply with the ordinance. And, so that's something that we're going to be looking very closely at.
Yeah. Thanks, Chief.
Great. Councilmember Milliman.
Thanks, Scott and Pam and Chief, for clarifying that. And I would agree with you, with all of you. To me, a gun is a gun is a gun. And like you said, whether it was, manufactured in the 1940s or 50s versus 2020 or 2021, it's still a weapon that can be used to harm another individual. So I would support an ordinance that goes across the board, no exceptions. And I really do appreciate all the work that you and Reed put into all into all of this with the regulations. So I think it's easier and cleaner and safer just to keep it uniform across the board.
City Manager.
Mayor and Council, maybe one suggestion I would offer here, and maybe have Reed, our City Attorney, respond to. But I think if the intent is for Council to allow the police department to make some kind of review and judgment about how to kind of manage different kinds of firearms, then perhaps one approach is to pass the ordinance as it is, and then allow the police department to create, in essence, an administrative regulation about how they're trying to actually implement this. And they're going to learn a few things. There is no doubt. Again, we are plowing new ground here. And then I think you can put a requirement back on staff to report back within some period of time. Let's just say 1 year. And we could share with you the administrative regulations that we put together to try to implement this, and in essence, the lessons learned. And so that if we do have to change the ordinance to, manage this differently to meet Council's expectations, we certainly could. Or we could do it sooner, I suppose, if we encounter some other issues that we are just not foreseeing here this evening. So with that, I'd like to suggest that maybe have our City Attorney kind of respond to that particular approach.
Yeah, thank you. I will say that within the actual ordinance is 324.11. It also actually has that section in there. It's called an administrative section. And what that allows is for LPD to develop kind of or promulgate rules as it relates to the enforcement. I'm certainly thoughtful and sensitive what Mayor Pro Tem's talking about, and Pam and Ms. Milliman as it relates to, a firearm is a firearm, but certainly there could be a type of firearm. I'm not sure. I haven't been to that particular store, which is nowhere near being in a mode that's actually operational. Perhaps it is strictly antique, and the ability to discharge any projectile is remote at best. Most of the intent regarding the firearms ordinance is protection of public health and safety, and so that's paramount as it relates to this ordinance and whatever LPD could come up with in the future. Is protecting public health, public safety from firearms, making it onto the street to be used for the commission of other crimes. I don't know if there's too many musket-related, crimes happening. It's certainly possible. I'll defer to Chief Stevens on that.
Okay, well, Chief, I'm gonna let you off the hook on this one. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Now, I've been to Old Still many times, and they're not all musket weapons down there. It appears to me to be a very secured building. However, it isn't like glass walls or anything to that effect. When you walk in there, it is a concrete building. They do have more than one entrance, and I believe this ordinance does say something about more than one entrance. They can only have one entrance into a safe room. And that would pose a problem for that particular establishment as well as the other retail. It's because they just have a lot more weapons. Pawn shops are different. All the pawn shops I went to, relatively simple for them to lock the guns up. Not simple, but relative simple. Whereas the two retailers, it's definitely more of a challenge for them because they do have more than one door. And it'd be something the chief would just have to look at and be satisfied. Is it secured or is it not reasonably secured? And then follow up. If they say they're going to do something, we do need to have a follow up to see if indeed they did do what they said they would do. Councilmember Grove?
I don't know if the rest of council would agree with me, but I think maybe I support the ordinance. That maybe we not wait a whole year, that after the evaluation has been done, that we look at evaluating the ordinance. It troubles me that we have something targeted at basically 5 businesses, and possibly more, basic 5 businesses, and one business has said that they refuse to abide by this ordinance. And if I'm the other 4 businesses, I have to abide by them, given there's a unique situation. And of course, we value our business owners and we don't want them to go out of business. We don't want them to move, but that's a little disconcerting. So my recommendation would be maybe that we have a plan that comes as close as possible to adhering to the ordinance in deference to the other retailers that have to do it.
And to the city attorney, what is the timeline for the establishments to comply?
August 1st.
And again, I think we are looking at putting at least one business, and that could be Old Steel, out of business, at least moving from Littleton. So I do have some concern there, and when they're not a particularly an issue here. And the other retailer, they have some work that they would need to do to secure their safe room. That's for sure. Council, I do want to make one amendment before it gets too far away from me, if I may. So I'd like to amend. Excuse me while I get to it. It is page 4, number 9. I would like to amend.
Mayor, if I may, I believe it was 324.5 parent D.
Yes, 3-24-5D, to add the sentence, if contact information changes, city must be notified within 30 days. That's my motion. Do I have a second? It dies. Okay. So they don't have to notify us then if their information changes.
Jerry, I'll second that. I was looking for my mute button.
We had talked about 48 hours, not 30 days.
Yeah, I would suggest shorter.
Okay, I'm willing to go shorter. What does the second want to do?
48 hours.
48 hours? Okay, I'd agree to that. So the sentence would be, should contact information change, they must notify the city within 48 hours of the new information.
Mayor, if I could, the city attorney shared with me a possible sentence that might capture what you're trying to say.
Oh, fine. Now you say so.
If I may.
Please.
The city attorney suggested adding a sentence, any change to the authorized individual's contact information shall be communicated to the Littleton Police Department. His suggestion was within 24 hours, but we could certainly change that to 48.
I would like to go with what you just said, Colleen, with 48 hours. And do I still have a second on that, Patrick? Yep. Okay, so we do have a motion in a second. Is there any more discussion on that adding? I don't see any. So Colleen, if you could please read the amendment back to us.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Valdez moved and Councilmember Driscoll seconded to add a sentence to section 3-24-5 paren D to read, any change to the authorized individual's contact information shall be communicated to the Littleton Police Department within 48 hours.
Thank you. All right, Council, this is for the amendment. Thumbs up, thumbs down, approve, disapprove, vote.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. We still have a main motion on the floor. And, during the course of our discussion, what I did hear is what I heard, maybe you didn't, but what I heard is that there needs to be some flexibility with our police department in notifying or in working with these establishments to approve them. Is that what everybody heard?
That's what I heard.
Is there agreement on that? Because we don't really.
My thought is that let's put something on the books and then see what Chief Stevens comes back with, and at some appropriate time to let us know how we can get this one unique retailer to comply. I mean, that's my thought. Let's not.
And it would have to be before August.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I support the ordinance.
Chief, is that something that you could do before August?
Yes, certainly.
Great, thank you. All right. So council, if you heard that, then the chief will come back to us before August with maybe giving him some, or the department, some flexibility at their discretion. So with that, we do have a main motion and a second. Are we all ready to vote? So let's go ahead and vote. A thumbs up is to approve, thumbs down to deny. Ready, vote.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously as amended.
Great. Thank you very much. We will move on to our next item, which is agenda item 8B. It's Ordinance 01-2021, an ordinance on second reading establishing changes to the existing ordinance for technological enhanced naturally occurring radioactive materials for the South Platte Renew, and just for the technological enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material, the acronym that we will be using will be TNORM. Let's see. So council, we are considering to make some changes, to our code. And it's because of the recent changes to regulations by the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment Board of Health. So council, we will be deciding on a proposed ordinance here. And with that, I will turn it over to the city manager.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Council, here I want to make an introduction of Blair Corning. He is with the South Platte Water Renew, and he's here this evening to make a presentation on TNORM. So Blair, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mark. Good evening, council members. Good evening, Mayor. Thank you for your time this evening. I also have with me Matt Montgomery from our Attorney's Office, Hill and Robbins, as well as Peter Van Rye, Director of South Platte Renew, to answer any questions that you may have at the end of the presentation. So let me share my screen here. And we'll get started. Okay, can y'all see that?
Yes.
Let me get it out of get it into presentation mode. All right. Again, thank you for your time this evening. My name is Blair Corning, and I'm the Deputy Director of Environmental Programs at South Platte Renew. I'm here tonight to ask for your approval on language additions to the city code that would prevent discharge of T-norm containing materials to South Platte Renew. T-norm it's a mouthful. It's technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material. And what that is things like water treatment plant residuals or industrial sludges where through some process, some man-made process, we've concentrated the naturally occurring radioactive material and concentrated that material in a sludge or a waste product. So why we're bringing this to you now is on that slide. It can be found in water treatment plant residuals, the main thing we're concerned about. You can also find it in oil and gas waste, some industrial waste, some mining waste. Our main concern is the water treatment plant residuals and industrial waste of those. So why we're bringing this to you now, the State Health Department recently passed new regs on T-norm handling and licensing, and those just took effect in early January. What those did is set an exemption level at 5 picocuries per gram for T-norm. And if you're above 5 picocuries, it's a series of things you have to do. You have to have a radiation management program, signage, training, kind of an extensive list of things you have to do if you're above that 5 picocuries per gram exemption level. If you're at higher levels, say over 25 picocuries per gram, if we had over 25 in our biosolids, that would cause major financial impacts on our biosolids and beneficial use program. What it does is limit the farmland, the amount of years you can apply biosolids to that farmland to 20 years. And so that would have big effects on our program and on our finances. So the good news is, we've tested the biosolids and we're well below 5 picocuries per gram. We've tested 2 industries where we've, identified the potential, or there could have been potential to have T-norm coming out, and those were well below the 5 picocuries per gram. We also do continuous inspections and surveys and monitoring through our industrial pretreatment program to ensure that we know what's out there, and we think we're in good shape for now. So that's the good news. What this ordinance, or what this language in the ordinance is designed to do is kind of be forward-looking and protect against future discharges of mainly water treatment plant residuals or other industrial sludges that would have, the T-norm over the 5 picocuries per gram. Like I say, we don't anticipate any effects on current discharges, but we would like to have something in both cities' ordinances that says we don't accept that type of waste at the facility. Inglewood just took this up last night for second reading at their council meeting and approved the changes to their ordinance last night, just to let you know. Supervisory committees looked at this. City attorneys from both cities have also read the language, and we have Matt Montgomery here, who was the author of the language, so he can answer questions also. But that is it in a nutshell, but I'd be happy to take any questions or answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Blair. And council, before we get into questions, Sam Fox, if you would please remind our audience how they can participate.
Thank you, Mayor. Reminder to citizens wishing to speak during this public hearing tonight who have not already joined our queue, please call 669-900-6833. When prompted, enter the webinar ID 925-0816-7672. Please stay on the line and press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized for public comment.
Great. Thank you, Sam Fox. If council, do you have any questions? If not, we will go right to the public hearing. I see no questions, so it is 7:54, and I open the public hearing. Sam Fox, do we have any callers?
Thank you, Mayor. Our first caller will be caller 819. Caller 819, you have been unmuted. Please begin speaking.
Hi, Council. This is Pam Chadbourne, and I feel obliged to speak on this because I have for 3 years talked about biosolids when the biosolids approval came up. I want to thank Mr. Corning for actually mentioning biosolids and what the measurement is now, and what the level would be that would be a problem. And I think the right way to address this is take the bull by the horns and pass an ordinance and put the burden on people who might introduce this to our wastewater treatment plant. It is not right to try to avoid it by not passing any ordinance. And so I encourage the council to consider passing this as a preemptive strike against pollution in the wastewater that we pass to others and in the biosolids that we put in farmland. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Do we have another caller?
Thank you, Mayor. We have no other hands raised.
Great. It is 7:56. I close the public hearing. All right, Council, I'm looking for a motion.
I move to approve Ordinance 01-2021 on second reading, establishing changes to the existing ordinance of technology. Yeah. Thank you. Enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material T-norm for South Platte renewal, or for South Platte renew.
We have a motion and a second from Councilmember Milliman. Yes, that is a mouthful. Council, as we had heard from the plan operator, that the City of Inglewood did pass this already on second reading, so now it's up to us. If we have no more discussion, are we ready to vote? All right. So a thumbs up will be to approve, a thumbs down will be to deny. Ready? Let's vote.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Blair, and the rest of your staff for coming out tonight. All right. And Council, we have, let me get to my agenda here. I'm sorry, I lost my track here. Council, we have no other business. Where's my agenda? We have no other business. So if I would like to take a 5-minute break before we go into our study session. So I'd like to go ahead. It is 7:57, and this regular meeting is adjourned. I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session for Tuesday, February 2nd. It is 8:03. All council members are present with the exception of Council Member Elrod. Council, we are looking at one item tonight, and it's a big one. We are looking at our item is the subject is 2021 to 2022 council goal settings. This is our first meeting of 4. Typically, City Council spends about 2 days discussing council goals and setting directions for staff. This year, we are going to do it a little bit different due to conflict and schedules. We will have 4 study session meetings like this one. The subjects have been prioritized because staff requires direction from City Council before they move into their budget season, and that's where they're about to move into that already, if you can believe it. We're moving right along here. So tonight, this will be meeting number 1. And if we go beyond 10 o'clock, then we'll have to pause at that point and discuss whether or not we'll continue at that point. But with that, I will turn the meeting over to the City Manager, Mark Rolfe.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the introduction, and good evening, Council. So as the Mayor pointed out, we're going to be making a little bit of a shift here this evening. So we are going to be talking about the very broad, important issues here that the Council sees as the priority here for our community and certainly for this organization. So let's move to the next slide, Samuel, please. So one of the most important things that a city council can actually perform is this goal setting process. And so we are here this evening with a series of issues here that we have worked. We actually had a facilitator meet with council individually. And so we've assembled an agenda for the next 4 meetings. And so that is largely the agenda. And let's move to the next slide, if I may. So when we have a goal setting, part of the exercise, quite honestly, is to reflect a little bit on what we've accomplished in the past year or more. And so attached to the materials here this evening is that list of the accomplishments that this organization has actually accomplished here in the past year. I'm not going to necessarily go through the detail of that, but I think it is noteworthy that we take a look at that we share with our community what we have accomplished, even during a pandemic, that we've accomplished a great deal of activity here for our community. And so here this evening, I would like to suggest that we just take a second and celebrate that fact. Now, it's time for us to move on to what faces us here in the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the purpose and the schedule here. And this evening, we're going to be talking about, as informational purpose, kind of a financial update. So Tiffany Hooten, our finance director, is going to be sharing some information with you about our general fund and our capital project fund. We're also going to share with you a little bit of research that we've done here on what we would call diversity of revenue. And we've actually looked at a series of our peer communities around us so that they have an understanding about how other cities have kind of addressed revenue from a broader sense. So I think I just want to be kind of straightforward with council here. In the next basically 4 meetings, we have some issues that I think we'll find very exciting, and I think our community is going to be really pleased with probably where council will take these ultimately. We have a couple of issues, just to be frank, that are going to be very, very difficult. We've had financial challenges in the capital project fund for some time. And so we know that we've reached a point in time where we must act. And so a week from now, we're going to be sharing with you some solutions to the issue. But this evening, again, we're going to be talking about the problem itself. And hopefully council has a better understanding of that going into next week's conversation. Quite honestly, we have a similar discussion around the general fund. It may not necessarily be in quite the position, but we have an issue that we must address in the long term if we want to maintain our services and programs. And then goal number 1 is really the first major issue on our list. And we started with this thinking largely that we've gone through a process here for the past couple of years that have really pushed this issue as the number 1 goal. And we'll talk about that here a little bit later. Next slide, please. So we have these 4 meetings that have been set up. So we have had this kind of financial overview, and the ULUC we'll talk about this evening. Next week, we will talk about the potential solutions that we can propose here for council consideration around financial sustainability. We have a new issue, our new goal that's being proposed for council to consider that we would call innovative infrastructure. This particular topic actually used to be part of the goals and objectives of financial sustainability. But I think over time, we are suggesting that it is probably most appropriate to pull this issue out and to give it its due credit. And really the question for all of these potential goals is, do you want a strategic plan for each goal for us to pursue and to communicate to our community? Then on the 16th, we're going to be talking about probably the next large goal, next big struggle, and it has to do with kind of our downtown and all the issues that are associated with downtown. That has everything to do from Denver Water wanting to replace the water main right down Main Street, to parking issues. We've talked at length over the past few years about a business improvement district or a downtown development authority. So we have a whole myriad of issues that are kind of coming together in the downtown. And so we as staff are going to be suggesting to you perhaps a strategy of how we may be able to take a very complicated and interwoven issue and stretch that into more of a strategic approach over time. We're also suggesting that we look at the Open Space Fund. We have 2 representatives to the South Suburban Board, Councilmember Elrod and Councilmember Grove. We've been working together with staff to try to take the priorities of the past and see if we can make sense for them in the future. It's been a pretty interesting exercise to this point in time. In fact, we had a meeting with South Suburban here this morning. And so we want to bring all this material back to the council so that we can at least approve a 1-year plan. And specifically, there is a budget proviso on the Open Space Fund. And so hopefully council will find this acceptable and that we'll be able to release the budget proviso and then proceed here with the construction of a lot of open space projects and work with our partners. Then on March 2nd is the remaining 3 goals, and we'll talk about next steps and kind of a wrap up. So arts, culture, tourism, housing and livability. This is probably a continuation of the conversation around the homelessness that we had last Thursday with the Tri-Cities. And then last but not least is what we're calling as staff environmental stewardship. And this is a series we're going to be sharing with council, a series of review of programs and services that we've done in the past that could be tied to this, kind of basically an inventory and assessment, and then perhaps some suggestions about how we may pursue that here for the future. Next slide, please. Council's seen this many times, and certainly within the organization. We're calling this our leadership framework. So the conversation we're having this evening is part of a much larger process. So we are starting in the upper right-hand corner when we look at the community and city council. They bring together in this annual process, and we talk about goals, struggles of our community, what's really important. What is it we need to focus our resources? Ultimately, this comes up with a series of goals, objectives. Staff will take this and suggest some action steps. It all comes back to council here in April, and you will review and approve and formally approve this. Ultimately, that becomes our strategic plan for the organization. Then we move this into what the mayor alluded to earlier, into our budget process, and specifically priority-based budgeting. So if you have goals and objectives, then the next step is to align that with our budget. Once council approves the budget, then we actually implement this deeper into the organization, service plan delivery specifically, all the programs and services that tie to this. These are the action steps and implementation. We take that right down to the individual goals of each employee. We go through the process of measurement and review. And then if necessary, we will look at process improvement. And then a year from now, we start it all over again. One of the pieces in the very center of this is something that we've been working towards here for the last couple of years. This organization does not have a series of defined vision, values, and mission for the organization. And so we've been working through the last several months. I have to admit, COVID has interrupted this, but this is what, in essence, defines the culture of this organization. How do we take this process on the outside and actually internalize it as the culture of this organization. So it all links. And so this is what we call our leadership framework. Next slide, please. Councils over the last few years have seen this graphic, this analogy. And so this is what we're calling how we develop a strategic plan. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes kind of highlighting this because I think it's very appropriate here as we start and look at what's council's responsibility and then ultimately what staff does to bring this back to council for implementation. So here this evening, we're looking at the purpose and the vision. We're at a much higher level. So we're flying the plane at 50,000 feet. And so we're trying to now look not only to the vision, but now start to define what are the real strategic goals of this organization. And so as we kind of move down the flight path and we look for basically landing the plane, we can see here below that we look at establishing goals. We start to align the goals with our resources, our budget process. And then we actually look for the actual priority items, the planning piece of this thing. And we actually work that into our leadership framework as time goes on, tie it to the budget, implementation strategies. We actually authorize contracts for implementation. And then eventually we engage. And so you can see here, this is trying to show that we start with the high responsibility of the city council with the vision and the goals. And then slowly over time, we work with council to actually implement, to track those changes and to report out periodically our progress. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Tiffany Hooten, our finance director. She's going to be sharing some information on the general fund and on the capital project fund. And I'm going to take the opportunity to kind of inject some, some comments into that periodically to highlight what I believe are, in some cases, an actual crisis that we've got in the capital project fund. And I can't overstate the significance of this. We must act. We are to the point in time where this has been pushed down over time. And we're now reaching a point where this is absolutely critical. So with that backdrop, I'm going to ask Tiffany if she would please carry on with the presentation.
Sure. Good evening, Council. I'm going to briefly go over the general fund, kind of give you an update of where I feel we're going to end for 2020 and looking to 2022 in the out years. And then we'll also talk about the capital projects fund and some of our continued struggles there. So a brief overview of the general fund. Our largest source of revenue is sales and use tax at 78%. Of that, retail sales tax. So when you go to the grocery store, you go to a restaurant, one of our Home Depots or Lowe's, you're paying sales tax when you purchase items from those. So that's retail sales tax, and that's about 87% of our total revenues. We also receive general use taxes at about 6%. And then we have some other specific tax revenues of motor vehicle, specific ownership, and cigarette tax, which is about 7%. But it's very clear that retail sales tax is our largest source of revenue in the general fund. We also collect franchise fees. So these are fees related to XL Energy, Comcast, some of those utility companies. And then we also do have property taxes. Now, just a reminder, our property tax mill levy did change beginning in 2020, and that's related directly to the fire inclusion. And so property taxes used to be our second largest source of revenue, but with that change, it is dropped down slightly below franchise fees. And then we have various other revenues that we maintain and manage throughout the year, such as court fines. We have intergovernmental revenues and things like that. And so I think what's important here is the graph that I have here just kind of shows you a little the past few years related to sales and use tax revenues. And you can see in 2017 and 18, it was pretty stable. We did have an uptick in 2019. We anticipated to be around that same level in 2020, but then we had the pandemic hit, and that significantly impacted our revenues in 2020. You're going to see that a pretty large decline there of where we estimate we're going to be. And then in 2021, although I feel like this may be a little bit optimistic, just not understanding the true impact of COVID, I am hoping that we are back up to our 2020 original levels, but I will caution you that we continue to watch that. We're continuing to monitor that. We've seen some upticks, but we've also seen some downfalls. And so it's very important for us to watch that and manage that. Okay, next slide. I already kind of mentioned retail sales tax, but I think it's important to kind of focus on this one individually. It is our largest single source of revenue for the general fund. And so this is funding our library, our museum, our community development, public works, streets, fleet, a number of items that retail sales tax funds within the city. And as I mentioned, it was significantly impacted by COVID-19. For 2020, we are actually looking to see a 7% decrease in our retail sales tax. That's a pretty large decrease. It's about $2.1 million. And as I also mentioned, we're hoping that we're going to be back to pre-COVID levels in 2021, but we're going to continue to remain cautious on that. I think back in May, we presented some estimates to council as to what the impact of COVID-19 was going to be. And just to kind of refresh your memory, you know, we had a few scenarios, and those scenarios ranged from 11% reduction to 24% reduction. So really early on, we were very cautious, very, you know, we really wanted to look at what is the worst case scenario, and we wanted to start addressing that originally and in the beginning. And we did that. And so I think just looking where we are today, looking through December, knowing that it's not final until the audit is completed. But our scenarios, I mentioned ranged from 11% to 24%. And it looks like we're going to be around 9%. So a little better than our best scenario, but I can't caution enough where we might end and why we need to continue to watch that. Okay, next slide. I kind of wanted to just show you a picture of where we ended for 2020. And again, this is on a cash basis. Remember, sales tax are reported a month after the actual sale or collection. And so this is kind of a one month lag. I kind of highlighted 2 months, April and July. April was when the pandemic hit. March 13th is when we were on a shutdown. And so the April is really when we started seeing the impact of COVID restrictions. And then we went through May and June, and then we hit July, and July actually was about even with 2019, which was positive considering we had seen so many reductions in the previous months. And then if you continue to look through 2020, we have been well behind what our projected monthly revenues were. And so I think it's just important to understand the true impact of COVID. You know, when we prepare our budgets, I feel like I'm really conservative. And so even when we prepared the 2020 budget, it was in the hopes that we were going to be better than we anticipated. And then COVID hit, and I think it's very evident the true impact of that. Okay, next slide. So when we talk about expenditures, you know, we are a service-oriented organization. So the majority of our expenditures are related to personnel at 69%. We also have a number of operating and maintenance items that we manage. And then we have a small portion of capital and non-capital. And primarily the non-capital consists of the 3.1 transfer to the Capital Projects Fund as a result of the fire merger. I think one thing that I just want to remind everyone is that when COVID initially started in March and April, we reacted quickly and proactively, actually. We met internally a number of times, probably more discussions on our 2020 budget and where we might end and what we might need to reduce and what we might need to change more than probably any year that we have in the past. And we made great strides. We identified $2.1 million early on that were included professional consulting and some learning and education reductions and things that we felt it was necessary to either put a hold on or eliminate from the 2020 budget. So I think staff did a really good job understanding the potential impacts and addressing that in the beginning. So I think going to the next slide, you know, what does this look like for the city and what are we looking at in the future? You know, we prepare 5-year financial plans every year on every fund, and our main focus is really on the general fund and the capital projects fund. And so looking forward, when we prepared the 2021 budget, in the 5th year, our policy is that we remain at between 8 and 18% fund balance of our non-operating or of our operating revenues. And so with a change that was made in December related to police personnel, we're looking to have our fund balance be at 7.6%. While it's slightly below our 8 to 18, it still is within the range. And, you know, forecasts are only as good as they are in the moment that you make them. They're going to change consistently depending on the day of the week, the time of the year. And so I think you have to understand that that can certainly change. I think one thing also is our limited revenue growth. And looking at 2020 and how we had projected our future total revenues for the general fund, those have significantly changed due to COVID, and trying to understand and realize what that impact is going to be. You know, we might have projected that our revenues were going to increase by 2.7%. Well, now we're looking at 2.5% or even less than that. And so this is not just a one-time impact to 2020. It's going to impact us every year going forward. And at what point will we be back to where we were? I just don't know if that's actually going to happen and when that might happen. I think the other thing too that we need to really focus on the general fund, while we may say the general fund is stable, and it appears to be stable because we are working within the confines of our fiscally constrained 5-year plan. What is concerning, or what we need to really focus on moving forward, is the declining fund balance. You know, we're not going to be able to keep up with inflation over the next 5 years and beyond. We're not able to keep up with our operating and maintenance demands in the general fund over the next 5 years and beyond. And so I really think that's where our focus needs to be, on the general fund. The other thing that this doesn't take into account is any additional personnel that might fund any new programs. This is clearly staying status quo where we are today, providing the same service and the same programs that we're providing currently. This doesn't allow us to expand, it doesn't allow us to enhance, and it doesn't allow us to plan for the future and make those important investments that we need to, even in the general fund. Information technology impacts the general fund. That's a huge portion of the general fund, and how we can enhance that. And if we continue staying at the same levels and the same service we're providing today, it's just not going to be possible. And we're going to have to address that going forward.
If I may, Tiffany, let me just add a couple of comments to what you're making, just to emphasize several of the points that you've made. Again, this evening is really about just informational presentations here, and hoping that the council can have a little bit of discussion around this and kind of see the problem that we have. And looking at this graph, this trend should concern us all. We cannot maintain that trend. We must find another target, somehow diversify the revenue and bring something else to the city so that we can provide some stable year after year approach. So eventually we reach a point in time where we'll have to make draconian cuts in order to stay within the revenue. We can't allow that. I think we owe it to our community to tell them the problem that we're faced with. And I'm sure they will respond once they understand that this kind of decline only results in a loss in the quality of life that we enjoy in our community. This has to change. Okay, Tiffany, I'll let you take the next slide.
Okay. So now we're going to jump into the capital projects fund. And we've had a number of discussions with council over the past several years related to our capital projects fund. You know, in 2021, we're looking for our fund balance to be 2.4 million. Our fund balance policy requires that we maintain enough in there to meet our next year's lease obligations, which are about 1.5 million next year. We have a few leases that will be paid off in 2022 and 2024, but we do want to maintain that fund balance enough to cover those next year's lease payments so we don't default on those. You know, we have a limited amount of revenue coming in 2021, and we have some planned expenditures that simply are a must. We have to continue to improve our facilities and our vehicles and our streets and infrastructure as best we can, while also maintaining a 5-year fiscally financial plan. And that's really tough. It's really hard to have such a limited amount of revenue and still address all of our needs related to infrastructure and information technology and building maintenance and public safety equipment. There's a lot of competing needs in the capital projects fund. Do you want to, next slide? You know, I talk about competing needs and limited revenue. We have 3 sources of revenue for the capital projects fund. We have the HUTF gas tax, highway user tax fund gas tax. This took a significant hit in 2020 as well related to COVID, with people working remotely, not traveling, not using gas, not paying those taxes. We definitely saw the impact of that, and it's going to continue. We'll look at a slide where I show you the estimates in the next 5 years related to those reductions in the gas tax. Those revenues are dedicated to street and maintenance and infrastructure related items. And so we cannot use that to address our capital maintenance needs. We can't use it to address our fleet replacements. We can't use it for information technology. It's clearly only for street related items. The other one is the transfer from the general fund. And I'm kind of jumping to that one. It's definitely the largest source of revenue. It's about 3.1 million as a result of the fire inclusion. But again, that is limited to street maintenance and infrastructure repairs and programs and capital improvements. We can't use it for the other capital needs that we have at the city. The only one that we have available that we have to share among lease payments, we have to share among police equipment replacements, information technology, fleet. The only one that we have for that that's dedicated for that is building use tax. The volatility of building use tax is everywhere. It's across the board. It can be as low as 392,000 in 1 year. It can be as high as 2 million in 1 year. It's highly reflective of the building in the community, the apartments, the replacement of homes, the building of homes. It's highly volatile. And so understanding that we are trying to manage a plethora of capital needs while only having a limited amount of revenue and really not knowing what that revenue might be in any given year. As I mentioned, 300,000 could be upwards of 1.5 million. 2021, we reduced the revenue estimates related to building use tax just because of the slowdown in the market, slowdown of building permits. And we typically want to see 1.5 million, but we're only going to be at about 1.3 million. So those are the 3 main revenues. And really the only one that we have pure discretion is the building use tax. And it's very limited in the amount that we get in any given year. Next slide. Building use tax. I mentioned the volatility. Again, we try to project these on a monthly basis for any given year. And you can see in April was the month right after the COVID pandemic started. And you can see 2020 actuals, we are well below what we anticipated being in 2020. And that impacted what projects we can do. This impacted some of our information technology, some of our fleet, some of our ADA requirements that we're trying to minimally address every year, that got reduced even more as a result of this. Next slide. So this slide, I wanted to kind of show what our projections looked like pre-COVID and what they look like after COVID. So you can see, I keep mentioning 1.5 million. So we had an inflation factor. Well, looking at our 2020 estimates, we're not even probably going to hit 1.2 million. So we already have about a $300,000 reduction there. Same thing in 2021, we're going to see a reduction. And even in 22, 23, and 24 and beyond, it really is going to impact what that might look like next year. These 5 years that we're portraying here, it's a loss of revenue of $650,000 over the next 5 years. And that's anticipating that we're going to be back up in 2022 through 2024. We had to look at our vehicle replacements. There was a submittal of about 1.3 million. We typically have been able to only fund 800,000. In 2020, we reduced that to 180 just so we could address our police car replacements, our police vehicles. Those were priority. And so with a loss of revenues, we significantly reduced that. And even in some of the out years, and then I mentioned ADA improvements. We're trying to address that on an annual basis, and we just don't have the revenues to do that.
And Tiffany, let me just add a couple of comments here for council. The ADA requirements have been in place since the early 1990s. And so we have struggled as a city trying to make those improvements. And councils over the last few years, you've heard from Keith Reeser, our public works director, just about that level of effort. So we are under some federal requirement to make those changes, but we struggle deeply trying to make any meaningful change. I want to pause on the fleet a little bit. When Tiffany talks about a request of 1.3 million for annual replacement, that is vetted heavily by staff to make sure that that is the number that we truly need. So literally we go out and kick tires trying to decide, is it really time to replace this, or can we get by for another year? What's the level of maintenance that we're actually putting into very specific vehicles? Is it something we can live with and actually push out that replacement? So that's still, when we do all that work, we're still looking at a $1.3 million annual replacement. The fact that we have to go to the level of reducing that replacement to under 200,000 should be alarming. We cannot do business that way for very long. We will run our fleet into the ground, and then we will eventually pay a very large cost. So next week, we do have an option that will eventually take the fleet out of the capital project fund. And we are going to be suggesting that we look at the revenue from the marijuana retail as one option for us to kind of start to buy us a little time and pull the fleet out of the capital project fund. It also has the added benefit by using the marijuana funds to look at meeting some of our grant obligations for projects like Mineral in Santa Fe. Again, we will talk about that next week, but I think this graph is showing we've taken a hit with COVID. It was bad before. It's gotten very, very difficult. And so we are at a point now where we really must act.
Mark, this is Jerry.
Yes.
At some point, can you brief council? Our budget has increased year after year after year, but the deferred maintenance has increased year after year after year, but we have been spending money elsewhere. Would it be possible that you could come up with some sort of a graph like this that just calls out where we've been spending the money versus where we should have been spending the money?
Well, I think, Mayor, my specific intent with using priority-based budgeting was for us to kind of take on that very complicated question. It's not necessarily an easy graph to show. And so the purpose of priority-based budgeting is to identify what are the real value that the community has. What are the programs and services for which are critical, and for those for which we have more discretion. And as council knows, You know, we are being recognized as probably one of the leaders in priority-based budgeting in all of North America, not just in our region, but in North America. So we have actually pushed this concept further than any city has in such a short period of time. So we are trying to address this. So I think it's difficult, Mayor, to answer that very specifically. I think coupled with priority-based budgeting, we're trying to realign resources. And I think COVID was an opportunity for us to really put that to practice. Now, wasn't any surprise, I think, to anybody here and certainly to our community, but, you know, we looked at trying to preserve those high services. It tends to be the snow plowing and police patrol. And then we had to look at some of those that were of, you know, lesser priority. Difficult for the community, but lesser value. So places like the library and museum, we had to reduce the cost. So the question becomes, if you have limited resources and you use priority-based budgeting, then you're going to tend to see that police and public works tend to rise. And if you truly want to cut costs, you're going to have to look at very hard decisions. You're going to have to look at those other kinds of services or other revenue options to preserve those services that maybe we haven't talked about before. And it's my intent next week to talk about some of these things, the tough conversations, some things that we've been reluctant to perhaps talk about, but we're now to a point where we must.
I guess the point I'm trying to make, I know Scott viewed our public works facilities, and I think maybe Pam and maybe a couple others, but until they really see how dire our public work department is, the building wise, it's hard to grasp it if you don't know how bad that situation is, while at the same time we're funding other things that don't have that same importance to the city.
I understand your point, Mayor. I think maybe we have a slide here that talks about some of the unfunded capital. And, you know, I think in the last few years, we've been trying to inventory and assess all of our assets. And I think the buildings is one of those. And so in a week, we are going to be able to come back to council and talk about maybe more specifically, what is it that we should be spending? You know, the magnitude of what we should be spending is well over $1 million on building maintenance. We got 30 some odd locations scattered across our community. And we've been historically spending $300,000. Once again, we've artificially picked a number for which we had to balance our budget, but we have not put the resource into building maintenance as probably a good example. So I may take your comment, Mayor, and maybe with staff, maybe try to approach that next week and provide you maybe a little bit deeper response if that's okay.
Thank you.
I mentioned highway users tax fund. So this is the gas tax that we get a share from the state. And, you know, over the next 5 years, including 2020, we're estimating a reduction of $500,000. This is actually dedicated strictly for streets and infrastructure related projects. So this definitely impacts some of those planned projects that we might have had in the past, where we either have to reduce those projects in scope, or maybe there are some that we just aren't going to be able to get to over the next 5 years. So I really just wanted to kind of show you the true impact of COVID on these two very specific revenues that fund capital and infrastructure. Okay, next slide. For our 2021 budget, we have about 7 kind of categories that we have for planned for 2021. Our leases, we have an obligation to our debtors to ensure that we meet those lease obligations. So that is definitely our number one priority. We talked about vehicles and apparatus, only $180,000 in 2021. Technology, and I think technology is another area, in addition to building improvements, that the need far outweighs the funding levels that we have currently. Mark mentioned building improvements. We have a need of over $1 million roughly annually. We're only able to fund 300. Technology could probably be in that area as well. It could be $1 million. You know, there are a lot of things that we could do internally with technology increasing some of the services that we have right now, allowing better performance, better reporting, better data. We just simply don't have the funds to do that. And technology is expensive. We all know that. And funding $340,000 a year, really just tackles some of our basic needs like laptops, servers, but it doesn't allow us to expand on that. It doesn't allow us to look at new technology that the citizens, the city, that staff could all benefit from. The other is equipment, $203,000. This is mainly related to the police department. That is enough to replace some of their mobile MTDs, their mobile data terminals that they have. But there are a number of technology opportunities out there for the police department as well. Streets and infrastructure, we made the change to have 3.1 million transferred annually. So that really is helping our street maintenance, but it still doesn't get us to the levels that we really should be providing for our citizens. ADA improvements, again, we have a minimal amount in the 2021 budget. Some of the items that, all right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. We talked about unfunded capital requests. There's a list in every budget for the past 5+ years where we have been trying to identify capital needs throughout the city and putting those on this list so we can be transparent and people can understand these are the projects that we are not able to get to. These are the repairs, the replacements. You mentioned Building 2, I believe, is what you're referring to at the Fleet Center or at the Public Works Center. That is an unfunded capital project, capital need that we have right now. The sheer volume, sheer dollar amount that it will take to repair, replace that building far exceeds our annual building use tax. So if you wanted to use building use tax, it would take a couple of years to collect those revenues so that you could address just that one particular capital item. We have over $98 million of identified capital that we are just not able to fund right now. Building 2, changes to this building. There's a number of additional street improvements that we're not able to fund right now. We talk a lot about Santa Fe and Mineral. It's very visible. People see that in their daily routines, but we have a number of other intersections and streets that we need to address, and we simply don't have funding for that. I talked about technology. That's part of our unfunded capital needs. Building maintenance, we have I can't remember the number, but 30+, 40+ buildings that we maintain in the city that need updated. They need improvements. The longer you put those off, the more expensive deferred maintenance is going to be. So really trying to address those now and get them on a schedule and having a dedicated revenue to address that in the future is very important.
If I may, Tiffany, let me add a little bit of commentary as well here. First of all, we should maybe step back and congratulate ourselves for the ability to transfer money over to the Capital Project Fund for street maintenance. As we know, we have struggled with that pretty historically and pretty deeply for quite some time. And as a result of the fire merger, we were able to make that commitment. So we have addressed. In our community, we should be very proud of the fact that we've been able to address that to a large extent. But when we talk about the streets and infrastructure, number 2, that color, what is not funded, these are the kinds of things that our community probably would just demand that we respond to in some fashion. And this is the piece that we need to communicate, why we have a problem. So things like adding capacity to our street network in order to kind of manage the impacts of growth, that's one issue. Or just simply safety improvements scattered across the city, intersections and traffic signals, and you name it, within the network, there are a series of things over time. As congestion goes up, so does the accidents. We have nothing in our budget to address that. And as we talked about building maintenance, that's one of the more things that, I think Building 2 is pretty fascinating. It's a step back in time to 1947 when it was constructed. We've gotten our money's worth out of that. It's time to do something different. Lastly, I think on technology, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about a separate goal about innovative technology or infrastructure. We don't pursue technology for technology's sake. What we are trying to contrast that against is the delivery of service and programs. We don't have the luxury of hiring a bunch of staff and throwing it at the problem. So the question becomes, how can we use technology for service delivery? Is that more effective? In essence, is the question. And so we are just hamstrung by the fact that we've identified potential projects for which we could become more effective and more efficient, but we have no revenue source for it.
Okay, next slide. This graph here depicts the Capital Projects Fund's 5-year projections. And this is what we refer to as our fiscally constrained financial plan. We talk about all of these demanding needs and our limited source of revenue. And so every year when we meet internally, we have to really understand what the priorities are. We have to make those priorities fit into this 5-year plan, and then we have to act on those. And I think, looking at year 2025, we literally have a fund balance of $2,000, and that is very concerning. I have another slide that we'll kind of talk about looking forward, but I mean, to only have $2,000 going into year 2026 and only a $1.5 million revenue source, what are we going to fund in 2026 and beyond? How are we going to fund it? If we have $900 to $1 million need in building maintenance, do we put $900,000 towards building maintenance and not replace technology, not replace equipment in the police department? Those are things that we're going to have to discuss. And, again, the diminishing fund balance and a little bit of history about the Capital Projects Fund. It looks pretty healthy at $6.6 million at the end of 2019. But the only reason that we have that healthy of a fund balance is because of one-time revenues that we've had over the past 10 plus years. We had a water fund here at the city of Littleton that was transferred into the Capital Projects Fund. Looking back at prior year budgets, there was a point where we had a fund balance of less than $2 million. It was approaching $1 million. And, we were struggling back then. And then, we had these one-time revenues that helped us through those years. But at some point, those one-time revenues are going to end. And I feel like we are there and we are seeing that right now. We don't have a water fund that we can transfer $12 million. We don't have Denver water rights that we can sell and get $2.2 million from. We don't have those opportunities anymore. All we have is our building use tax revenues going forward. And we have to be strategic how we address this going forward. Okay, next slide. $2,000 at the end of 2025. That is dismal, whatever that word is. It's terrible having that small of a fund balance in such a high need capital fund. And by high need, I mean a number of capital project expenditures that we need to address. I think my number one question and what we really should be talking about is if we have $98 million of known needs, and I want to emphasize known needs, those are things that we have identified internally. There are so many things out there that are going to come up over the next 15 years. There are so many things that we are not aware of that are going to surface. And if we know we have $98 million of needs over the next 15 years, that's about $6.5 million annually. And we only have a $1.5 million revenue source. How are we going to address that shortfall? And then what about these unknown needs that come up during the future years? How are we going to add that on top of that? So I think that is the biggest question. And you can see here again, the fund balance is diminishing into 2025. And trying to understand how are we going to address that, I think is the number one question. Mark, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just that I think this evening is just about talking through this information and just whether or not council kind of understands the magnitude of the issue here and, recognizing that we got a problem. So acknowledging that is kind of the first part of the thing. So it's next week where we have some more in-depth recommendations and approaches about all this, everything from the capital project fund, the marijuana revenue, other forms of revenue diversification, and certainly the general fund. In fact, we do have a little bit of a presentation that Kathleen will add to the end of this here, just to talk about that diversity of revenue. Well, I guess that's a pretty good lead in. So council, if you don't mind, we just got a short presentation here by Kathleen Osher to describe why we put this in the packet. And then maybe we can step back and let council have some conversation around what we've presented.
Thanks, Mark. We can go ahead and advance to that next slide, but in an effort to help deliver on your desire to be more data driven, the first point of any exercise is always to go out and do that research and get sort of a landscape of what our peers are doing, what the full universe of options may be as we start to think about diversifying revenue. One of the other pieces of this exercise in working with our partnership with the consultant EPS, and this is part of the overall strategy for the tools that we need to develop a strategic direction for economic development that fits back into the overall focus for the organization. We are looking at a series of peer cities to understand how we kind of fit and sort of stack up. So this is an overall scan of the universe of options, but does also take a look at how we sort of compare to our peer cities. So again, the peer cities that were part of this research were Arvada, Centennial, Greenwood Village, Lakewood, North Glen, Parker, Westminster, and Wheat Ridge. And so what we found overall in the context of Littleton was that we're seeing very similar growth, but we're seeing a large growth rate with ages 65 to 74, similar to other cities. We are also seeing a relatively strong growth rate in ages 25 to 34. I think that's some of the diversity of housing that we've added as a city, allowing some of that growth in that younger age demographic. Employment growth was pretty comparable. I would say that we've seen an increase in multifamily growth with really strong rental rates as compared to some of our peers, but we continue to have some of the lowest rental rates for commercial properties among our peers. The revenue growth per capita is, really one of the issues that we looked at as part of this analysis. So we are, without a doubt, among our peers, the most reliant on sales tax. We have a relative lack of funding diversity. We've spent some time this evening digging in pretty deep on our financial update and really understanding that. But as it compares to our peers, it definitely comes through very glaringly. We obviously have one of the lowest property tax rates among our peers as well. And, that reduction as part of the fire inclusion definitely puts us, towards the bottom of that list. What's interesting is we have the second lowest growth rate for expenditures among peers. So, to the mayor's question earlier, in terms of the services and programs that we're delivering to our community, they are getting the greatest bang for their buck. We're keeping we're keeping expenditures down, and we're working with much fewer resources than our other peers. And then obviously the thing that we've spent a ton of time on this evening is just how the majority of our capital needs are unfunded. So next slide, please. As part of the peer revenue, or as part of the peer overview, we also took a look at a prioritized set of recommendations. So as we look at that universe of possibilities across our peers, the recommendations that we heard from our consultant were: one, a dedicated sales tax to address those capital needs. Two, a lodging tax. 3, looking at an additional tax for retail marijuana above and beyond what the current sales tax is. Looking at the possibility of other public financing mechanisms. So when you think about something like a metro district and being able to do some of the financing for infrastructure relative to a project, we're thinking sort of beyond that. So general improvement districts and other tools that may be possible to consider. We also had the 4th recommendation of adding a downtown development authority as part of our approach to address capital needs, specifically in our downtown area. And then, as you know, we are looking at our impact fee program and doing the work to understand what the options may be relative to those impact fees. And so that I know that that's slated to come back in a couple of months to council for further discussion. While I think that these recommendations are an important starting point as we look at the university of possibilities over our peers, we do know that there are other options that are specific and sort of customized to Littleton. So we look forward to bringing that as part of the conversation for next week's presentation as well. So with that, Mark, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so again, I think the intent here is to hopefully provide council with a little bit better understanding of where we're at in the general fund and the capital project fund, specifically the impacts after COVID. And then I was hoping that a little bit of this research work we did with our peers give you kind of a sense of the landscape. So as we get into some conversations here about how to address the problem, maybe council has a preference for looking at one option or another. So I think that would be my comments. And Mayor, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you and let the council have some conversation around this, and be more than happy to answer any questions.
Don't you have a few more slides?
I think we do. Let's see. I think we do on the ULUC, but I think not on this topic. Am I mistaken, Tiffany?
No, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yep,
So
you're right.
Maybe we
All
should
right.
unshare the screen at this point and let council discuss this.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, council, who wants to start her off? I think we're all at a loss for words at the moment. Okay, Councilmember Driscoll.
Thank you, Kathleen and Tiffany, and certainly Mark for the presentation. This is not new to myself or Jerry or I guess and Carol or Karina. We've been talking about this since we've joined council, and I'm sure Jerry is well aware of it. It's been going on before we joined council. So this is nothing new. I'm ready to make the tough decisions that are going to be discussed next week and eventually hopefully put on the ballot for, I think most of the suggestions we're going to make or recommendations are going to have to go on the ballot. Is that accurate?
Many of them will, yes.
Yeah. So I'm prepared, and you've been painting this picture for 3 years, and it's getting old, and I don't see us digging out of this hole any other way than to make some big decisions here. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Member Grove, then the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you for the presentation. It was depressing. I think that you've talked about this, we've hinted at this, but just to see it all together. And I appreciate all the choices. I think I'm with Pat. I think we need to make some hard decisions, and they have to be sooner rather than later. I think the key is going to be messaging what this is for. And as you talked about it, dedicated taxes, this is going to be for infrastructure, or to have people understand this is just not going to go into the ether, that it's just nice to have a raise for the city as we need more money. It's what do we need more money for? One of the challenges I think we're going to be facing is that we're going to have 4 open seats on city council, and traditionally it's a little tough to recommend raising taxes in an election year. So that's going to be a little bit harder for us, but I'm hoping that we can all rise to the occasion and do what needs to be done and get our funds in a healthier position.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, then Milliman.
Thanks, Mayor. I think even for the new council members, this story is one we're very familiar with. I remember very similar presentations at our first retreat as a council way back in January of 2020, and I completely agree with Pat and Pam that now's the time. I think we absolutely need to get, for instance, a sales tax increase on the November ballot for this year, and we need to start laying runway now in terms of political consulting, in terms of strategy around messaging and so on. I think we have to do it, and we have to give ourselves the very best chance for success. I'll really look forward to the conversation next week when we pin down strategies as a group, as a council for what we want to do here. And I certainly agree with the city manager's characterization of our financial situation as in many ways a crisis. I think we've just got to do it. One thing I've sort of floated with some of you that I kind of want to raise publicly and just put it out there is the water treatment plant. Yeah, sure, let's raise taxes and bond against them, and I think that's going to be great. But in terms of getting out of a crisis, it would be useful to have an infusion of cash. And I remember when we were talking about the budget, the fund related to the water treatment plant just goes down and down and down and down because the capital needs for an asset like that are just astronomical because of, in large part, the environmental regulations that have to be followed. I personally don't think our city has any business owning an asset like that. I think that if the finances work out, and they may or they may not, we need to have a conversation about selling it. Now, I understand that Inglewood also co-owns this, and I don't know how they might react to something like that, but that's potentially a huge asset that could give us a huge infusion of cash and help us long term. I really think that 5 years from now, whatever council is sitting at that time is going to be hearing a story about this fund and it being a crisis. There's just no way long term that fund helps us out. It's just a disaster waiting to happen as far as I can tell. So I just wanted to float that.
Oh, thanks for adding a new disaster to our current disaster, Scott. Councilmember Milliman, then Fay.
Tiffany, thank you so much for the presentation tonight, and I agree with Pam. It's very depressing, but it's something we knew was it was going to be coming before us, and yeah, we do need to act now. There's no excuses, no more putting it off. It has to be dealt with. And one interesting data point that was in your report was our annual general fund growth is at 3.5%, which is the third lowest in that peer group. Number one is Centennial at 19.34%. That's huge. That's a huge, huge difference. So I hope that we can change that trajectory. I did have a question about North Glen and their 4.0 mill property tax for the capital projects fund. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And is that a potential, opportunity for us to do the same thing?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly the details. Kathleen, do you recall?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can definitely find out more about just how that came to be. I think we are all in full recognition in our internal conversations of just how challenging a property tax increase is. But I'm happy to find out more about North Glen and how they were kind of the path towards that as a solution for them.
Well, yeah. And I would agree with Pam as far as, educating the public, really, really educating the public on where we are, what our needs are. And it's almost sort of like saying, if we don't do this, this is scenario A, here's what we have to cut. Maybe it's the library and the museum, in order to be able to keep, our police force, trained. You know what I'm saying? Like, here's where we are. If we don't do this, this is what we get. These are some of the scenarios. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. I would think it would be, so people understand, if you don't support this, then okay, we get it. You don't want to support it, but here's what we have to let go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And yet we get emails saying, don't cut this, don't cut that. But our job is to manage the money. All right. Did you have anything else, Kelly? No? Okay. Councilmember Fay.
I think this brings us back to responsibly managing a budget. We tend as council members to have our favorite things that we want to have funded, as if the infrastructure doesn't exist. So it's really good to have Mark and Tiffany bring us back very firmly tonight to we have infrastructure that really needs to be funded, and we really need to do something about it. I don't see it as depressing. I see it as, wow, we have an opportunity to things. And we've known, as Pat said just now, that this is an old story. We've known we needed to fix it, then we have the means to fix it. So when we talk about it next week, let's start fixing it. Yeah, we have a bunch of really smart citizens. And if we can get the messaging out there, and I'm sure with Kelly Nardi and her resources, we can get it out there, that the city simply needs more money to operate responsibly, and then spell out what where the shortfall is. It certainly worked with the fire inclusion. People, the voters leaped at the opportunity to pay more money in taxes. I learned from Tiffany recently that for a $500,000 house, that property owner pays $70 a year in property tax to the city of Littleton. That is so little money. And while we're talking about this stuff, I think that a lodging tax is not the only thing to look at, but is certainly a no-brainer. In that, having done a lot of business travel myself, I always expected that the company I was working for was going to be paying lodging tax. and we don't have it, but we could. That's all.
Yep. All right. Thank you. City Manager.
Yeah, I think, appreciate all of council's comments there. But I think Carol strikes kind of an interesting tone here. It is an opportunity. And I think that we do have a story to tell our community. We have an amazing place to live. Thinking about the assets that we have in Littleton that is so unique, and quite honestly, the envy of most of the Denver metro area. Now, they need to understand, in order to protect those assets, to protect that quality of life, we have some risk. And so if we're able to tell them, what is that specifically? And we'll talk about this next week. And council knows that I've been involved in all sorts of bond issues. And I'm going to knock on wood, because I haven't lost an issue yet. And the reason why, in my opinion, is that you have to be very specific, because our voters are very informed. There's lots of media for them to understand and connect to an issue. So you do have to explain to them what's the purpose, for how long, and why is it important. And so I think we have a wonderful story to tell about all that. And so, quite honestly, I have a lot of confidence in our community. They will respond when we tell them the facts.
Great. Thank you. And I'm up next. And one of the things I want to make sure that we always keep in mind that, and Carol, you just referenced this, but housing is cost the city. It's not a revenue generator. It's an expense taker. Whereas commercial properties, is what we really live on. As the graph showed, that we are a sales tax dependent. So as we're doing our codes, we need to make sure we keep talking about, generating money. Well, it's great to have housing, affordable housing, and just any housing. It does cost the city, and we don't want to keep making our problem worse. That's why it's always important that we not give away commercial property and turn it into retail. So we've got to keep those kinds of things in mind. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I guess just to piggyback off that, Kathleen's team in collaboration with Kendra Keast. No, it's ES. Is it ESI? I always forget the name. That team of consultants is coming forward with some really exciting new tools for the city as we're moving through the ULUC and considering sort of development and redevelopment going forward. Basically, to make sure that a proposed development is going to pay its own way, and that the city as a whole has a balanced portfolio, that we're making sure that we're considering sales tax revenues, et cetera, when we're considering land use and zoning and so on. I think a corollary to what we're talking about tonight is using those tools to the greatest effect, making sure that they're really central to our decision making. So
great.
That's
Thank
all.
you. All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, Mark, you got us through this night.
Okay.
Almost.
Well, that's
I'll have the first goal. So, but this one should be easy.
That's the one I was looking for. Okay, there we go.
And do you mind, Kathleen, I want to make a little bit of an introduction here.
Yes, please.
This should be perhaps straightforward, but at the same time, I don't want to minimize the significance of what this issue is all about. As the council knows, we have been plowing through time, years, trying to first set a vision. So we formally went through into the community to gain what is that vision for our community. We got thousands of contacts around this, and the council took that and adopted it formally. Then we moved into the comprehensive plan. So what are the policies that we have to act on in order to create that vision? That's the next piece we connect. Then now this piece, the ULUC, is the ultimate implementation of some of those strategies. Not all, but a big piece. And one of the central themes that we are trying to address, and we've heard it over and over again, is protecting community character. We are on the edge of doing something great, in my opinion. Now, Kathleen's going to share with you kind of a summary here, and again, we're asking council maybe the obvious, but it's just reaffirming that this is the number one goal.
Yes. So good evening again. We are here tonight to reaffirm that this is council's top priority. So the Unified Land Use Code has been part of a multi-year and multi-milestone approach to being able to manage growth in the city and think through the vital needs that are part of our community. Can I have the next slide, please? So just in terms of update, the project, as you know, when we come before you with every update, is on time, and we are scheduled for your consideration October 19th of this year. The project is on budget. You will remember that we took a very customized approach and a very groundbreaking scope to try and deliver this in a series of 5 building blocks. So that we're able to look and really dig in deep and present a unified land use code that brings in both modern best practice and then also takes into consideration what we know is an incredibly unique context for what the look and feel of Littleton is. So this groundbreaking scope and this customized process were well underway. As you know, I believe it was we're almost at the year anniversary of when we kicked this off in the community. I think that was February 8th of last year. We are building every step of the way on the work that we have done as part of Envision Littleton. To Mark's point, with the vision work kicking off in May of 2018, and then all of 2019 spent on both a comprehensive plan and transportation master plan, that future land use and character map becomes the foundational piece of how we address what land use and zoning codes look like for the city. We are looking towards the future with every bit of the Unified Land Use Code that we'll present to you when we have a public draft on June 7th. We anticipate that we'll be able to help guide the next 25 years of the city. So with that, we'd like to reaffirm that this is the top priority for council. And if there were questions, I'm happy to answer any of them.
Yes, as council get ready to get your hands up, yes, that is my top priority, to keep that going. We cannot stop the ball rolling there. A part of what I was thinking too, as you were talking, is that our economic development, we really got to work on our economic development as a part of these codes. That needs to be going on as well. And I'm saying that more to Mark, I think, in this case.
Yeah, well, and I would say, the tools that Mayor Pro Tem Millen mentioned earlier become quite central to this, because while we've had a conversation for decades about the cost of housing as opposed to commercial, there's a level of complexity and data that it needs to be available for both Planning Commission and Council to really make informed decisions. It's interesting when you look at any given project, because of our reliance on sales tax, the short term is harder in terms of making the finances sort of add up. The long term, most things play out. As much as housing costs, rooftops drive retail. We had this conversation as part of the work that we did in downtown. So we need those rooftops also to be able to support the retail and the overall financial outlook for the city. So there is a level of complexity that we're in full recognition. We haven't had the tools at hand to be able to drill down specifically on projects. So that's one tool. And then I'll basically combine all of that, the forecasting and incredible work that Tiffany and her team do. How do you start to use all of that input so that we can look through a series of 3-5 scenarios and really understand what the out years start to look like? So very much a part of this process for the ULUC, but in the long term helps set a strategic direction for economic development that fits in the overall strategic direction for the city as an organization.
All right.
Yeah, maybe, Mayor, the piece I'd add on to what Kathleen shared, I do think that we're going to have some pretty exciting tools to create the kind of data that council's asked for, a data-driven organization. So for the first time, we will have that. I think too, the other piece that's important is that just the timing of all this, certainly the comprehensive plan pointed as a policy direction, economic development, and how you could focus that. First things first, we got to get the ULUC, the code done. So we have to be able to tell the development community, if you're going to build here, this is what we want. Once that's decided, the next step is for council to step back, take these tools and decide, where do you want to invest? Where do you want to stimulate some kind of activity? That is the economic development kind of plan, strategic plan that I look forward to after we get this ULUC done.
Great. So council, is there anyone who has a different priority than what Kathleen has outlined there? Looks like that is the number one.
Looks like Councilmember Grove has got her hand up, Mayor.
Oh, yes, she does. She just raised it. Yes, thank you.
I just want to say that this has been amazing feat that has been kept on track, sometimes without the help of council. I will tell you that I've thrown more than one wrench in the works, and you have come back very professionally, and we've overcome it and we've worked it out. And I'm just real excited to see the results of this. It's just been an amazing amount of work from staff in an amazing amount of a short time frame in the midst of COVID. So kudos to staff for doing this. And thank you very much. And we're looking forward to continuing on the process and October 19th when we see the final result.
Well, if I may, Mayor, just thank you, Councilmember Grove. I think it's important that you shared that. And I think it's also important to acknowledge, we have a vision. The council has a vision of what they want. Staff sees it. And so in order for us to get there, there has to be this level of cooperation and collaboration. So as we see issues for which the council's uncomfortable with, and Councilmember Grove, you weren't the only one who had, challenges here. There was many of you that raised, hey, wait a minute, I'm not quite comfortable. So kudos to you for kind of acknowledging that. And then for all of us coming together to figure out, okay, well, what is it we can do? Kind of get the information you need as a council member to be informed, to make a proper decision. And then ultimately stay on schedule, stay on budget.
Yeah, easily said. Well, information that you provided tonight is so important to council and to all citizens to understand. I'm always cautious to use the word to educate citizens because it sounds like we want to educate them in our way. I like to provide information and let them come to their own conclusions, which hopefully will be the same as what we're seeing because it is dire. And thanks to the Mayor Pro Tem for bringing up another one, matzo ball that's just hanging out there for us to have to address at some point in the near future, probably. So Mark, did you have anything else on this?
I did not.
Okay. Well, what I want to do is, we've been through some tough information tonight, very good information, but I know it's Carol said it's an opportunity, but it also it's a downer to some degree to get there. But you started us out earlier, to Mark, talking about the many successes or accomplishments that we were able to pull off. The city staff was able to pull off during this past year. But maybe you can just give us some highlights of some of our accomplishments after Patrick, after Councilmember Driscoll has a comment.
You can call me Patrick. I don't mind.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Mark, would you give us a little bit of a timeline regarding the budget and how that plays out? So we have a study session next week, and we go over our goals and planning for 2021 over the next 4 weeks. What would your hope be to have some type of resolution on that to move it forward, to get the marketing moving, to obviously get it on the ballot?
Well, that is exactly the kind of detail we're preparing now to share with you next week. So, generally speaking, the budget process, we have a conversation with council as goal setting the 1st of February. We work through the objectives and action steps, and then you formally adopt, say the 1st of April or late March. Staff is then in the budget process starting really in April, but we get pretty geared up in May. So now we're trying to connect all this. So your goals, your objectives, your strategies, we're trying to see how that may fit a budget. Well, COVID's a little bit of a wrinkle here this particular year still. But in the case of a ballot measure, one of the things that we will share with you are the very distinct steps that you need to take in time. So you'll have some discussion next week. We're not expecting you to answer all things relative to the issue. So we will lay out a strategy of the next meeting, the next decision point. And so that you gain more information, then eventually we're to the point where you are going to say go or no go. I hope that answers that.
That does. Do we not need to do anything formally within a regular meeting on that?
You will. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's the point I want to get to.
And that's the time frame you're looking to back up that schedule, see what it looks like.
Yes, absolutely. There's some things that you provide direction in a study session is one thing, but eventually you're going to get to the point where you have to vote on an issue to decide to move forward.
Yeah, I want to give our marketing team and the messaging team out there enough time to make this a no-brainer for our citizens.
Good.
Yeah. Good point.
And I appreciate that staff has made some adjustments. While we normally do our goal setting in a 2-day thing, I appreciate staff being flexible on making it work the best we can. it just goes along with the COVID thing. This is different, but I think we can really make it work. So Mark, can you end us on a positive note here?
Yeah, in fact, Sama, do you have the opportunity to kind of bring up the list of accomplishments?
Sure, give me just a minute to pull that up.
Okay. You know, again, just while she's doing that, for me in particular, I'm one of those kind of people that get something done, I forget about it and move on to the next challenge. And so I think I'm always kind of pushing to the next issue here. So that's me. But I do think that it's important for us to kind of assemble kind of a list of things that we have done so that we can kind of reflect back and just acknowledge, hey, you know what? We've done a lot of work.
Yes, you have.
So let's see. I think, Sammy, you've actually worked with the department directors to put a few of these together here. So you might, if I may, just kind of impose upon you just to kind of hit a few things that, as you were working through this, that probably worth pointing out.
Sure. Nothing like being on the spot, huh?
Yes.
So, one of the things that we saw when we really worked through this is it broke into some categories. So one of the themes was resiliency, innovation, and boldness coming through our comprehensive plan. And this encompasses a lot of the work we were able to do during COVID-19 to pivot and change how we applied resources and change how we operated to still provide services, as well as things we were able to do with the CARES Act. I mean, we've talked about 3 years of work in 6 months as a result of CARES Act funding. This was no small lift. So some of these items include the CARES Act grants to local businesses, the restaurant space we did, the downtown Main Street, updating our audiovisual systems, and then just the sheer number of services we transitioned to online in a very, very quick manner. That also translates into our...
Give us an example. Examples.
Oh, sure. So it also translates to our improving customer service experience, where we were able to update See-Click-Fix to allow non-emergency issues to be reported through the system. We were able to allow the court to offer online payments, as well as update our Track-It system used by community development to offer more online payments and services.
And Track-It, Mayor and Council, was one of the bigger pieces that we implemented here to allow the interaction of the building and the development community directly into a system online. So, this is you have to congratulate a lot of staff on projects like this. So, the IT, Ashley, Bolton, and the group, but certainly Jennifer and the building department, how they all came together to kind of push these kinds of things forward in the midst of the pandemic. I really have to, congratulate the staff. They really took it on. So when Ashley says, 3 or 4 years worth of work in 6 months, she's not kidding.
Great.
Yes, huge efficiencies gained.
And some of the public also were, upset and not happy with city management at times.
Oh, sure.
And you still kept going forward and getting these things accomplished.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have some time at some point to reflect back on this whole pandemic. And in the first few months, it was real chaos. I think at the national level, certainly at the state level, everybody is just trying to get their arms around about what this really is. And I think one of the things that I think we should be proud of is that we took a measured approach. Tiffany talked about this. So we didn't overreact. We looked at each month, we planned, and we had all sorts of scenarios in case it got really bad. But we were able to take measured approach. So when we had to cut back, and that was just inevitable in the end, we didn't overdo it. So yes, we did have some of our community who obviously were bothered by some of those cuts. The library and museum are probably two obvious ones. But in the end, we took that measured approach, and we should congratulate ourselves for not overreacting.
Yeah, and since you brought up the library, I want to recognize the library staff for what they have continued to do under these tough times. In particular, Val and some other folks in the children's section of the library, because it's so important that those services still are available to the kids?
You know, we had what we call the City Manager Awards, and I know you saw a little of this, but one of the teams that was considered for Team of the Year was actually out of a library to do much of what you just described, Mayor, is how they took the pandemic, they embraced the challenge, and looked for ways to engage our community differently. And so, you know, that level of innovation and creativity, I'm telling you, it was impressive. Now, it was also, you know, very difficult under the circumstances. And so it wasn't easy for them. But again, you know, we do have a great set of employees in this organization who truly have the best interests of our community.
Here. And the museum staff as well.
Absolutely.
And they're doing that while people around them are being laid off.
Correct. Yeah. So it was, you know, in the end, we had to make some tough decisions just because of where we were at financially and basically the state health orders. But we did everything we could to kind of maintain a level of service that, quite honestly, our community was looking for as long as we could.
Thank you.
Yes, and you can see a number of their programs highlighted in here. Another category that came through is just the maintaining momentum, building on our shared vision and responsiveness to council. So maintaining the ULUC process through COVID, adjusting to add the downtown phase 1 and phase 2 changes, finishing out the Federal and Bowles intersection construction, even the ballot question we had. These were a lot of things going on during COVID. And then we continued our collaboration through partnerships, working with the Department of Transportation, working with Littleton Public Schools and the Littleton Public Library. They had formed a partnership this year, which was very helpful throughout CARES, as well as our work with South Metro Housing Options and the Tri-Cities Homelessness Committee.
Yeah, let me just pause on the homeless discussion here. I think, you know, again, we probably need to really hand it to Councilmember Fay for sticking with this group here for as long as we have and the work that it has done. And I'm sure that all the councils at this point, after seeing that presentation, just understand there has been a lot of work on this issue. We have some tough issues in front of us, but we have plowed some ground and positioned ourselves now. We've defined the problem, in my opinion, on homelessness to a large extent. Maybe not on all things, but certainly we start to get our arms around this. So now the strategy, the actual solutions that we can pursue, the things that we can't afford to do, now become much more evident and we understand what's the priority.
And Mark, also you mentioned on there the housing task force. It says formed in April. Wasn't it just reconvened?
Yeah, the intent of that, you know, was to kind of pick up the work that had been done some years ago. The members have changed, you know, because
you're right.
You know, people have moved on for one reason or another. But yeah, a lot of that work had started some years ago. But so that was kind of the resurrection of that concept. And again, the comp plan kind of pointed to the fact that, you know, we see this, the issue of affordable housing, as a policy issue. But in the discussions, we just had to recognize that, again, staff can't do all things all at once. And so we were looking for a partnership to somehow advance that. So that's where that task force kind of moved forward again.
And then through all of this, we were still an award-winning community. Through the American Public Works Association, our Utilities Operations Supervisor, Art Duran, won Professional Manager of the Year. The Littleton Twilight Criterion was voted the best of the best 2020. We were the winner of a Resource X Award this year for our utilization of the system. And even right before COVID, I was a winner of our Colorado CCCMA Awards.
Yeah, congratulations.
That's right. Yeah. Now, you know, I talked about priority-based budgeting and the national recognition that we have achieved. And you know, I know that it's been, you know, a real challenge, certainly internally to the organization, to move this forward. But, you know, I am absolutely convinced that priority-based budgeting is one of the best ways for us as an organization to truly identify what is the priority and how do we match up that resource. And in the end, it is an excellent tool to tell our story, to tell what really is the priority of this community and why.
I'll agree on that priority-based budgeting, and you started that a few years back, Mark, and it came in full, fully implemented just in time.
Yeah, well, we lucked out, Mayor, and
Yeah.
I think we have to congratulate Tiffany and her staff, and certainly the entire organization. That Tiffany really took hold of this thing, and it wasn't easy. I'll tell you that. But she really embraced this thing, and we just made great strides with this.
And a part of that had to do with HR too, human resources.
Oh yeah, yep, absolutely.
And then we just closed out this annual report and accomplishments with some highlights from our 2020 resident business survey. This happened right before COVID, and it may be easy to forget because so much has happened since then, but this is a biennial survey that showed we still have a solid quality of life rating from our residents and our businesses. They still place a high priority on maintaining and improving infrastructure, and we still see a lot of support for sales tracks dedicated to infrastructure.
Great.
And Mark, that's the end of our document.
Great. Yes, thank you, Sama. Thank you for the impromptu tour.
All right. Do we have anything else, Mark?
I do not, Mayor.
Council, any closing comments? Go ahead. Normally, Mark, City Manager, I'd ask if there's any final reports, but I think you had one earlier. And the City Attorney, do you have anything else?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Great, cool. Well, then with that, Council, I think it was a good night. We got through it, and that was good. So with that, it is 9:39, and we stand adjourned. See you next Tuesday.
Okay.